Hey, everybody. So glad to be here with all of you tonight. Should be yet another great late night conversation. We're starting early so we can go long. Glad to be here with all of you. Let's do it.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
All right, everybody. Let's have yet another great late night conversation. Plenty on my mind tonight, as I'm sure that you all are aware. And there's a lot going on in the world that we do need to talk about that is directly related to all the great stuff that we do as a community. Plenty to talk about. Before I jump into it all, we do always have a few announcements to start out with on these streams. We always have a few things we can talk about. So the first thing is our usual announcement that we have morning messages on the Center for Political Innovation YouTube channel every morning. Every single morning, we do our best to have a morning message, and we've been doing pretty well so far. It's been quite a long time since we've missed a morning message. So every morning on the Center for Political Innovation YouTube channel, we have a morning message from a member. It's a great tradition that we've got. Start your day with revolutionary hope and optimism as we are building our anti-imperialist community. We want to be there for each other. So tune in. It's a great way to start your day, hearing from different members of our community, hearing different perspectives. And in addition to that, if you are so inspired, we now have a mechanism for you to make your own morning message and submit a morning message. If you feel like you would like to speak to members of our community, you can submit a morning message. And we have gotten a number of submissions lately. A lot of people are stepping up to the plate and doing it. We've got morning messages from a number of different people and new people we haven't met before, and we're scheduling them. It's really, really awesome. So if you'd like to make a morning message, we ask you to go and record one right now. Go and make a morning message. People are doing it. Our community, we are there for each other. And I really appreciate that. So every morning on the Center for Political Innovation YouTube channel, we have a morning message. Start your day with revolutionary hope and optimism, and great mechanism for people to make morning messages. Now, that's the first announcement I've got for you all tonight. Now, the next thing that I want to point out, I don't know exactly where to begin, because we had a great CPI meeting this afternoon with a good number of folks. I think there was 17 people on the call, this afternoon, general membership. It was a great conversation. And then afterwards, I basically wrote out a timeline of upcoming CPI activities, what we are doing, what we are trying to accomplish, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Exciting stuff. And as I wrote that out, I was thinking ahead, obviously, to many of the events that we've got coming up. We're all kind of waiting for the election to be over, right? This election is certainly not something that we're all thrilled about. We could all really, really wait until this political circus is over. But we're thinking about the election. And I've been telling you all to keep this date in mind. This date is very far away, July 12th, 2025, because this is the date of the next Center for Political Innovation mega anti-imperialist conference. This is going to be the biggest thing we've ever done. We've had conferences in the past. There's 100 to 200 people. This one is going to have 400 people minimum. It's going to be an all-day anti-imperialist mega rally in the Chicago area. And, we got plenty of time to plan it. We're reaching out to different allies and friends. However, in light of the election and in light of all kinds of events, it's becoming very, very important. And as you all know, you may not be aware, there's been some organizational changes in the Center for Political Innovation lately. We dissolved and liquidated the nonprofit that we are functioning with. We're currently existing informally. We plan to launch a new formal incorporated organization in the next couple months. But in the meantime, we are still looking ahead toward this very, very important date that is coming up for our mega anti-imperialist rally. And it's not going to be cheap. And so, because no one is paying dues to the Center for Political Innovation right now, because we are no longer incorporated, we don't exist, and we are still planning this big, big event coming up, we decided that for those that are supporters of our community and want to support the big, mega anti-imperialist rally that's coming up, we have a way for you to do that. Shout out to Peter, our member, Peter K. He set up a GoFundMe for the anti-imperialist conference that we're planning to do. Donate to the conference is now an option. So because if you want our event to happen next summer, our great anti-imperialist mega conference to happen, thanks to Peter K., who set it up, you can now donate to do it. And since no one is paying dues, since the Center for Political Innovation exists informally at this moment, it's not incorporated, one thing you can do is set up a recurring donation. Send $20, $50, $10, set up a monthly contribution to help set the stage for our very important conference coming up next summer. That's a way you can help us out. So we have set that up, and keep that conference, keep that date in mind. You can now donate to help the conference happen, and just keep this date on your mind, because it's going to be the biggest anti-imperialist event we have ever done as an organization. It's going to be massive. It's going to have a wide diversity of forces, and we have a whole timeline that I was sitting down and mapping out this afternoon of what needs to happen between now and then. There's a lot that needs to go on. But one of the things that is happening is that we are able to raise money for it. And that the raising of money for the event is now possible. So if you are able to set up a contribution to help us do that conference, we would appreciate it. And keep that in mind. And please prepare to take off work, get your plane tickets, get your train tickets, get your automobile tickets. We are going to do something really, really important and special in the Chicago area next July. Right? We have plenty of time to plan it, and that's why we are going to pull out all the stops to make it a really, really special event. We have done small events before, but this time we're setting ourselves a big goal. 400 people, fill that auditorium, massive anti-imperialist conference in the Chicago area. In other news, it looks like we will be having an event themed around peace on the Korean Peninsula in New York City. Details about that to come. We are sponsors of the upcoming Rage Against the War Machine rally in Washington, D.C. Details about that. It's coming up. It's an important event. We're very proud to be sponsors of it. We donated to it when it was set to happen in February. And now they are going to do it now instead of February. They're doing it in September. We're very proud that we gave our money to be sponsors of it. And we've got a lot going on as an organization. So I just wanted you all to be aware of that. Morning messages every morning. Rage Against the War Machine in Washington, D.C. Big convention next summer, raising money for that big convention. Peace on the Korean Peninsula event coming up in New York City. We're doing a lot. We're doing a lot to build our anti-imperialist movement here in the United States. So we would love to have you get involved. Join the Center for Political Innovation, even though we informally exist. If you send an email about membership inquiry You go to our website, cpiusa.org, you can get involved. We are doing so much to support and build the movement that we need. And I'm going to talk about that on tonight's stream. So just a quick reminder of how these streams work. I give my opening remarks. My opening remarks are then followed by a roll call where I call you all out as I see you. And then from there, I answer your questions for the remainder of the night. So if there's something you want me to talk about in the second half of our show, by all means, send me a super chat or a Rumble rant. Send me a super chat or a Rumble rant. Sorry about the clinking glasses there. On Rumble, you can send a Rumble rant. On YouTube, you can send a super chat, and I'm here to answer your questions. Last night, people asked great questions and got me going. I even got tired because so many questions were coming in. So please, we're starting early tonight. It is just 17 minutes past 8 o'clock. I can go until midnight. So by all means, send super chats, get me talking. There's a lot going on in the world that is very, very serious that we need to talk about. It's related to the presidential election. It's related to our organization and the anti-imperialist work that we do. There's a lot going on. And so we're going to talk about it. And I look forward to the opportunity to answer your questions. So think of super chats for the second half of the show. And we will just jump into what it is that we are talking about for tonight. So I'll just tell you what's on my mind tonight. I think Donald Trump is going to win this upcoming election. I think Donald Trump is going to win. And I know there's probably people watching this saying, what are you getting at, Caleb? Oh, Kamala did really well in the debate and Trump did bad. I'm telling you, Donald Trump is probably going to win this upcoming election. And the reason that I think he's going to win is because there is a desperation on the part of the anti-Russian lobby in the United States. The Ukraine war, escalate against Russia, fight Russia at all costs lobby, the faction that is driving U.S. foreign policy toward escalating tension with Russia, toward all-out war with Russia, is getting desperate. They wouldn't have to act the way they are acting right now if it wasn't clear to them that Donald Trump was going to win. And that seems pretty clear at this point. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar, which I don't, I understand why you wouldn't be familiar. U.S. media does a very, very bad job of educating people about what's actually going on in the world. This war in Ukraine is something that was completely manufactured by the American government. The American government overthrew the Ukrainian government in 2014, overthrew the elected president, Viktor Yanukovych, who was neutral between Russia and the European Union, and instead they installed a fanatically anti-Russian faction into power in Kiev. It was called the Euromaidan coup. The Ukrainian government was violently overthrown. Petro Poroshenko was put into office. He was aligned with fanatical Russia-hating people based in the western regions of Ukraine. The Azov battalion and the Privy sector and such. And a government was imposed on Ukraine by the United States that is a fanatical anti-Russian government. And then almost immediately, the people in Donbass region declared independence because they said, we don't want to recognize a government that is hostile to us. The people in the eastern regions, they speak Russian as the language in their household. They identify with the history of the Soviet Union. And when this fanatically anti-Russian government was imposed on them, they declared independence. Crimea, which is, has been part of Russia for centuries. Crimea was declared part of Ukraine in the 1950s by Khrushchev. And at the time of the fall of the Soviet Union, there was a treaty that was made. It didn't really matter when the Soviet Union existed because they were all the same country. And that, Khrushchev transferred Crimea to Ukraine as some kind of background deal. It doesn't really matter. It would be like, moving the border of U.S. states. They were still the Soviet Union. But after the Soviet Union was dissolved, there was a treaty that was signed that said that the Soviet Union, that Ukraine got Crimea as long as the Russian military got to have their huge military base there. And that was the agreement. The Russians could keep their big military base in Crimea, and Crimea could be part of Ukraine. And that was the agreement. But then, in 2014, when the USA imposed a fanatically anti-Russian government onto Ukraine, Crimea suddenly became, it became questionable whether that military base would remain. And because everybody living in Crimea is somehow tied in with that Russian military base, and their whole economy is centered around doing business with Russia and the Russian military, Crimea voted to become independent and join with Russia. And, people say Putin took over Crimea, Putin annexed or invaded Crimea. No, the Russian military was already there. They didn't roll the tanks over the border because the tanks were already there. The Russian military was already there. And the Russian military has been in Crimea for hundreds and hundreds of years. Read about the Crimean War, right? And so Crimea voted to join with Russia. And the people in the eastern regions of Ukraine at that point, the Donbas regions, declared independence from Ukraine. Now, Russia at that point facilitated an agreement called the Minsk Agreement, the Minsk Accords. And the people of the eastern regions wanted to break away from Ukraine. And Russia said, no, don't break away from Ukraine. Instead, let's negotiate a treaty that says that Ukraine has to start respecting your right to speak the Russian language, that says Ukraine has to treat you with respect and gradually reintegrates you back into Ukraine. And Ukraine signed a peace treaty called the Minsk Agreement. And that peace treaty was supposed to reintegrate the eastern regions back into Ukraine. They didn't carry it out. At no point did they implement the agreement they'd signed, and Russia waited, and Russia waited, and Russia waited. And then the government in Kiev began bombing the eastern regions. Instead of reintegrating these folks back into the government of Ukraine, the Ukrainian government, the Ukrainian government installed by the United States, the fanatically anti-Russian government forced on Ukraine by the United States, started bombing the eastern regions and killing people, thousands of people, probably 16,000, probably more, but at least 16,000 people were killed between 2014 and 2021. Right? And there's even a monument to all the children who were killed. Instead of implementing the peace treaty that Ukraine agreed to and reintegrating the people of Donbass back into Ukraine, the US-backed regime in Ukraine started bombing and murdering these people. All these children in that picture are dead because the fanatically anti-Russian government installed by the United States killed them by bombing Donetsk and Lugansk. This is the Alley of Angels, a monument to the children who were killed. So for 8 years straight, the Ukrainian government, backed by the United States, was murdering children in eastern Ukraine. And they signed a peace treaty that said they were supposed to respect their rights and didn't ever implement it. And after 8 years, Russia finally said, okay, we've got no choice, and they moved in to protect the people of the eastern regions. And that's what the war is about. And the people of the eastern regions said, fine, the Ukrainian government doesn't want us, we'll join with Russia. And they did what Crimea did, and they voted to join with Russia. And after 8 years of being bombed, after 8 years of not being allowed to be part of Ukraine, the people of the eastern regions, what was once eastern Ukraine, voted, and Donbass has joined the Russian Federation. And this is the result of the actions of the United States, installing a fanatically anti-Russian government in Ukraine, arming that government, allowing that government to keep bombing and murdering people for 8 years straight, not implementing the peace treaty. The people of Donbass had no choice, and Russia ultimately had no choice. It had to move in and protect these people. And these are the facts about the Ukraine war. And these are the facts they don't want you to know. They're trying to cover up. They want you to think Putin was having a bad day and in a fit of tyrannical rage, he decided to invade Ukraine because he's so big, mean, and scary. And that is not what happened. What happened was Russia showed a huge amount of restraint. Russia did everything they could to avoid the conflict. Russia waited 8 years as these children were being murdered with our tax dollars and murdered by the fanatically anti-Russian government the United States installed. And now Russia has no choice. Russia had to move in and protect those folks. And the USA is prolonging this war, pouring billions and billions and billions of our tax dollars into Kiev to continue this conflict. And Ukraine has already lost the war at this point. Crimea is never going to go back to Ukraine. The Donbass regions are never going to go back to Ukraine. And at this point, the USA is just trying to prolong it. Now, because Ukraine realizes that they have absolutely no chance of ever regaining the Donbass or regaining Crimea, they have responded by invading Russia. And they have invaded the Kursk incursion, it's called. And they've invaded Russia. And they've been shooting missiles into Russia and killing civilians and carrying out drone attacks in Moscow. And they have just been trying to harm Russia as much as they can because they've already lost the war. And this is not really a war about Ukraine and its sovereignty, blah, 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 blah. This is a proxy war with Russia. This is the United States and its allies trying to hurt Russia. And so now we have a moment where Ukraine, that has already lost the war, has invaded Russia, the Kursk incursion. The Ukraine that has already lost the war is shooting missiles into Russia. Now there is talk of long-range weaponry being used, of long-range missiles being deployed from Ukraine against Russia. And at that point, Russia says that creates, if the USA is giving long-range missiles to Ukraine, and those long-range missiles that they provide are then used to commit airstrikes against Russia, that is called a direct war with Russia. That's what you have to call it. And the United States is bringing it to the point of a direct long-range war because they know Trump is going to win. There's a division among the American elite, and I'll get to that later. But these are the remarks that were made earlier this week from the Russian president.
Наносить удары современными высокоточными системами большой дальности западного производства украинская армия не в состоянии. Она не может этого делать. Это возможно только с использованием разведданных со спутников, которыми Украина не располагает. Это данные только со спутников или Евросоюза, либо на Соединенных Штатах, в общем, с натовских спутников. Это первое. Второе, и очень важное, может быть, ключевое, заключается в том, что полетные задания в эти ракетные системы могут, по сути, вносить только военнослужащие стран НАТО. Украинские военнослужащие делать этого не могут. И поэтому речь идет не о том, чтобы разрешать украинскому режиму наносить удары по России этим оружием или не разрешать. Речь идет о том, чтобы принять решение о том, что страны НАТО напрямую участвуют в военном конфликте или нет. Если это решение будет принято, это будет означать не что иное, как прямое участие стран НАТО, Соединенных Штатов, европейских стран в войне на Украине. Это их прямое участие. И это уже, конечно, существенным образом меняет саму суть, саму природу конфликта. Это будет означать, что страны НАТО, США, европейские страны воюют с Россией. А если это так, то, имея в виду изменение самой сути этого конфликта, мы будем принимать соответствующие решения, исходя из тех угроз, которые нам будут создаваться.
So, what the Russian president there is saying is that if Ukraine starts launching long-range missiles into Russia, at that point, that is a direct war between NATO, the United States, France, Germany, Britain, and Russia, because it's not a matter of them simply doing it with America's permission. It would be a matter of the United States giving them the missiles and giving them the intelligence and telling them where to strike. If Ukraine starts launching long-range missiles into Russia, at that point, Russia and the United States and the NATO alliance go to war. And that's World War III. And that's how far they are driving us towards the edge. We are approaching the edge of a cliff. Why are we driving towards the edge of the cliff? Why is it that our leaders have a cliff in front of them and they're driving with the gas pedal towards the cliff? It's because Trump is going to win the election. And they realize it. And I'll tell you why later. But let's continue. This is the Russian ambassador to the United Nations, Ambassador Nebenzia, explaining the situation.
Iraq outside its territory, conducting terrorist attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure of our country. However, this potential development of the situation fundamentally change our relationship with the Western camp. If the decision to lift restrictions is really taken, that will mean that from that moment, NATO countries are conducting direct war with Russia. In this case, we will have to, as you understand, take the relevant decisions with all the consequences for this that the Western aggressors would incur. So washing its hand of responsibility and pinning all the blame elsewhere is something that our Western colleagues are not going to be able to do. Because we have intelligence, they say that there is intelligence from US and EU satellites.
Yeah. If Russia is struck by long-range missiles from Ukraine, that will mean the United States is shooting long-range missiles at Russia. All right, that will not be a matter of Ukraine just doing it by itself. That'll be the United States shooting long-range missiles at Russia, and Russia is going to have to respond to it that way. They're going to have to respond as if NATO as if the NATO countries directly shot missiles at them. And what do you do if you're a major country and another major country shoots missiles at you? You shoot missiles back. And that is something that we really don't want to happen. That is World War III. We are on the brink of a direct war between the United States and Russia. Now, this is utter insanity. Why in the world would our leaders even consider this? Why are they driving us towards the edge of a cliff? It's because they anticipate losing the election. I mean, that's just the reality of the situation. I have made clear from the beginning, I wrote this book, Where is America Going? Marxism, MAGA, and the Coming Revolution. That this book is about to be published in Chinese, mind you. The Chinese edition of this is weeks away from being published, from what I understand. The firm is arguing about the cover and all of this, but this book is about to be published. And in this book, I made clear that there is a division between the American elite, and it is the ultra-rich that are pushing an all-out confrontation with Russia, and the majority of the rich don't care. The majority of the rich just want to make money, but there is a certain faction, the Eastern establishment, the people who brought us Victoria Nuland, the people who brought us the neoconservatives, the foreign policy establishment, the Eastern Anglo-American establishment, the British Empire wing of the American elite, is determined to drive down living standards in the Western countries, reduce consumption, and have an all-out confrontation with Russia. And the bulk of the American ruling class doesn't agree with them. And it's not just the bulk of the American ruling class. The bulk of the population doesn't agree with them. And the bulk of the state, the bulk of the military, the bulk of the policing agencies, the bulk of the intelligence community doesn't agree with them. Behind closed doors in the United States, the let's go all out and have a fight with the ruling class. Let's go out all out and have a fight with Russia. Let's just focus everything on destroying Russia. That's losing steam. Victoria Nuland quit a long time ago, and the population is getting weary. And behind closed doors, the American ruling class, the American intelligence agencies, the American military, they're not for it. And as a result, they're going to lose the upcoming election. Donald Trump, who represents other factions among the American elite, a lot of whom are very, very supportive of what Israel's doing, a lot of whom very much want to have a confrontation with China, but who just don't think the Russia thing is worth it. Donald Trump has enlisted their support. And Donald Trump survived that assassination attempt on July 13th. And it looks like behind closed doors, their polling shows Donald Trump is going to win the upcoming election. Muslim Americans are not going to vote for Kamala Harris in Michigan, right? Dearborn, Michigan, the highest concentration of Arab Americans. Those folks are not going to go vote for Kamala Harris. In Minnesota and in Wisconsin, those folks are not, the Muslim Americans are not going to go vote for Kamala Harris. Muslim American associations are throwing their support behind Jill Stein, so much so that AOC had to do a big performative attack on Jill Stein. Meanwhile, Jill Stein is surging, and behind closed doors, they realize that the Ukraine thing is going to be abandoned pretty soon. They've thrown everything they can at the Ukraine thing. Ukraine is not going to win. Ukraine is losing steam. And there's really no way that they can do the Ukraine thing at this point any further without having a direct confrontation with Russia. And so Donald Trump is going to win the upcoming election. And they're angry about it. And this is a blatant moment. This is a mask-off moment. This was at the U.S. State Department earlier this week. They talked about how angry they are about this situation, and they said something really, really blatant.
Reasons why so much of the world has not been as fully supportive of Ukraine as you would think they would be, given that Russia has invaded Ukraine and violated rule number 1 of the international system, is because of the broad scope and reach of RT.
You are welcome, ladies and gentlemen. You are welcome. Let's repeat that.
Reasons why so much of the world has not been as fully supportive of Ukraine as you would think they would be, given that Russia has invaded Ukraine and violated rule number 1 of the international system, is because of the broad scope and reach of RT, where propaganda, disinformation, and lies are spread to millions, if not billions, of people around the world.
They basically just admitted that they're really, really angry that the world is not enthusiastic about their all-out confrontation with Russia and the war they provoked in Ukraine. And they're blaming RT for it. And they're so angry about this because it looks like they're going to lose the upcoming election. They're going to lose the upcoming election, and the USA is going to de-escalate the conflict in Ukraine. And they know this, and they're already mad about it. Kamala Harris is going to lose. Donald Trump is going to win, and they're going to de-escalate the conflict. And I can tell you why, right? I can tell you why, because of this great moment. You know, the debate happened on Tuesday, had a lot of great moments. This one takes the cake.
Into this conflict. Mr. President, it has been the position of the Biden administration that we must defend Ukraine from Russia, from Vladimir Putin, to defend their sovereignty, their democracy, that it's in America's best interest to do so, arguing that if Putin wins, he may be emboldened to move even further into other countries. You have said you would solve this war in 24 hours. You said so just before the break tonight. How exactly would you do that? And I want to ask you a very simple question tonight. Do you want Ukraine to win this war?
I want the war to stop. I want to save lives that are being uselessly, people being killed by the millions. It's the millions. It's so much worse than the numbers that you're getting, which are fake numbers. Look.
Now, if Donald Trump thought that this was going to cost him the election, thought he couldn't win by speaking this way, he wouldn't be saying that. Let's be real. If Donald Trump thought what he just said there was an unforgivable thing, was going to cost him the election, he wouldn't be saying it. But Donald Trump had absolutely no qualms saying he doesn't care if Ukraine wins or not. Now, that tells you that there are plenty of people in the Pentagon who think that. There are plenty of people in the CIA and FBI who think that. There are plenty of people within the government who agree with Donald Trump. Mainstream media is covering it up, and they're really angry, and they think it's RT's fault. and they're furious at RT. But the reality is Donald Trump, as a major candidate for president, as the presidential frontrunner, would not be talking this way if he thought this would make him ineligible to be president. And I mean, let's watch it again. There's plenty more in this clip. Donald Trump basically said that he just wants the war to end. He doesn't care about Ukraine winning. And he had full confidence, no shame, no apology for saying that on national TV. And they may ridicule him for saying it, but so many people in America agree with that. So many people within the government agree with him. So many people in the intelligence community agree with him. So many people in the Pentagon agree with him. Donald Trump can just say that, and they're seething over this. They're driving toward direct conflict with Russia with the long-range missiles, and they're having a meltdown at RT because they think it's RT's fault. At this point, they're angry because Donald Trump can just say this publicly and not fear any repercussions, not fear it hurts his chances of winning the election, because this is the reality. This is what tells me Donald Trump is going to win.
Their democracy, that it's in America's best interest to do so, arguing that if Putin wins, he may be emboldened to move even further into other countries. You have said you would solve this war in 24 hours. Which
is just ridiculous. Russia did everything they could to not move into Ukraine. Why would they want to go into other countries? This is just silly.
Said so just before the break tonight. How exactly would you do that? And I want to ask you a very simple question tonight.
Oh, boy. They're going to give him the gotcha. Oh, you better answer this the right way. And Donald Trump, without any fear, without any hesitation, says what he thinks. Here we go.
Do you want Ukraine to win this war?
I want the war to stop. I want to save lives that are being uselessly, people being killed by the millions. It's the millions. It's so much worse than the numbers that you're getting, which are fake numbers. Look, we're in for 250 billion or more, because they don't ask Europe, which is a much bigger beneficiary to getting this thing done than we are. They're in for $150 billion less because Biden and you don't have the courage to ask Europe like I did with NATO. They paid billions and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars when I said, either you pay up or we're not going to protect you anymore. So that's maybe one of the reasons they don't like me as much as they like weak people. But you take a look at what's happening. We're in for 250 to 275 billion. They're into 100 to 150. They should be forced to equalize. With that being said, I want to get the war settled. I know Zelensky very well, and I know Putin very well. I have a good relationship, and they respect your president, okay? They respect me. They don't respect Biden. How would you respect him? Why? For what reason? He hasn't even made a phone call in 2 years to Putin, hasn't spoken to anybody. They don't even try and get it. That is a war that's dying to be settled. I will get it settled before I even become president. If I win, when I'm president-elect, and what I'll do is I'll speak to one, I'll speak to the other, I'll get them together. That war would have never happened. And in fact, when I saw Putin after I left, unfortunately left because our country has gone to hell. But after I left, when I saw him building up soldiers, he did it after I left, I said, oh, he must be negotiating. It must be a good, strong point of...
Yep. Donald Trump had no fear about saying that on national TV, did not fear that that would affect his electoral chances. He said what he said about the NATO allies and how they don't pay, and Kamala Harris has got her, smug look on her face as she sits there and watches it happen. Donald Trump is going to win. And they're angry about it. And that's why they had their meltdown about, oh, the world isn't supporting Ukraine and it's all RT's fault. It's all RT's fault. And Donald Trump's going to win. I mean, and I'm telling you, Donald Trump is going to win. Right? They wouldn't have had, how do I put this carefully? What happened on July 13th, I think wouldn't have happened if there was a feeling that Donald Trump wasn't going to win this election. Make of that what you will. I'm not going to expand upon it. But I feel like Donald Trump came very close to losing his life. And there would be no reason for Donald Trump to lose his life if he was going to lose this election. And it seems to me that the Eastern establishment is outnumbered. They're outnumbered, and they're outnumbered not just among the public. They're outnumbered among the deep state itself. They're outnumbered in the Pentagon. They're outnumbered in the intelligence agencies. And it's not, and they're blaming RT for it. I hope that's true. I hope that my work at RT and the work of other great people at RT has contributed to that, because I don't want World War III. And I think what the USA has done in Ukraine, the policy there, installing this fanatical anti-Russian government that has murdered all kinds of civilians and murdered all these children, I think it's absolutely reprehensible. I think U.S. policy in Ukraine is absolutely reprehensible. I think all these children had a right to live. I think all of them had a right to live. I think they had the right to exist. And that what the USA has done in Ukraine is absolutely reprehensible. And anything I've done to help raise public awareness about the evils of U.S. policy in that region, I think is a great thing. And I'm very proud of what we do. And it's worked. I mean, the U.S. public doesn't want this war to continue. And the U.S. public doesn't want to keep spending billions of dollars. The U.S. military doesn't want this. They don't want to have a direct war with Russia. They realize that that's a pretty nightmarish situation. In addition to that, the intelligence agencies realize this is a big joke and it's a big waste. And the American state is pivoting away from the anti-Russia obsession. And Donald Trump is going to win the upcoming election. And they realize this and they're angry about it. And so before the election is even over, they're starting up. When Trump wins, it's going to be RT's fault. It's going to be Russia's fault, even though it's not. But that's what they're going to say. They're going to say, oh, Russia did it. Russia did it. And, and that's that, right? Because this policy in Ukraine is endangering us, driving us toward World War III. It's not good. And everyone can see that. You don't have to be an anti-imperialist. You don't have to be a member of the Center for Political Innovation to see how dangerous and disastrous the policies are. And Donald Trump is going to win the upcoming election. And the anti-Russia obsessed regime change neocon faction is going to lose, is absolutely going to lose. Now, I wanted to put an ad, this is an actual Kamala Harris ad that they made. This is actually a Kamala Harris ad. I'm going to show you this ad that Kamala Harris's team has made because I really, anyone who thinks that Kamala Harris is the lesser of two evils because Trump is so bad, anyone with any anti-imperialist sentiment in their body, watch this ad. Watch the ad. Right? You just watch this ad and you will see that, you will see who Kamala Harris's campaign is. I mean, what people are going to be voting on in the upcoming election is made very, very blatantly clear. This is an actual advertisement for Kamala Harris for president. This is an actual Kamala Harris ad.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
And when one man is enslaved, all are not free.
American presidents, Republican and Democrat, have always defied Russia's communist dictators and defended American ideals. Kamala Harris gets this.
If we stand by while an aggressor invades its neighbor with impunity, they will keep going.
Kamala Harris will stand up to Putin, protect our allies, and keep us safe.
Folks, that is a Ronald Reagan ad. That is a George W. Bush ad. That is a George Herbert Walker Bush Sr. ad. Right? You're supposed to vote for Kamala Harris because Trump is soft on the Ruskies. He's soft on Stalin. They literally put Stalin's face in the fucking ad. Did you see this? They literally, they got Stalin in the ad, right? Vote for Kamala Harris because she is more hawkish. She is more hostile to Russia's communist dictators. They're really making it blatantly obvious. Dick Cheney has endorsed Kamala Harris. It's very, very, very obvious at this point who's on what side. And voting for Kamala Harris is the equivalent of voting for George W. Bush in 2004. This is the reality of the situation. And public opinion shows they're going to lose. They're going to lose because of Muslim American votes. They're going to lose because they don't have support within the Pentagon. They're going to lose because they don't have support within the deep state and within the ruling class. They're going to lose because Europe is not excited about this. And they're getting desperate. And they're talking about long-range missiles. And they're talking crazy because they know they're going to lose. Right? If Kamala Harris expected to win, she would be doing the opposite. She would be downplaying this. She would be not turning on the gas pedal right now, right? They wouldn't be acting this way and highlighting the difference between them and Trump if they weren't anticipating a loss, right? If Kamala Harris thought there was a chance she could squeak through and win, she'd be pretending that she, she had a plan to resolve the conflict also. But she doesn't. She's not even pretending that, right? And that's that. And the fact that Trump could get up there and say his position so blatantly, that tells me, overwhelmingly, it tells me that we are going to see the victory of Donald Trump. And I am very, very happy about that. Even though Donald Trump did a lot of awful things as president, even though Donald Trump is a huge supporter of Israel and what it's doing in Gaza, even though Donald Trump is Donald Trump. And I got to tell you, I love the Jill Stein surge going on right now. I love it because, there's no reason that anybody who has any anti-imperialist, anti-war, anti-racist, pro-Palestinian sentiment should vote for Kamala Harris. And I'm not telling people to vote for Trump. I'm not telling people how to vote at all. But I'm telling you, I think Trump winning is probably the best outcome of this election. And, if voting for Jill Stein, who was there supporting the Uhuru movement in Florida with me, supporting the People's Democratic Uhuru movement, if voting for her is part of making that happen, good. If staying at home is part of making it happen, good. I think that Donald Trump is likely to win, and then the establishment will amp up all the very negative things about Donald Trump, and they will amp up the hostility toward immigrants. They will amp up the anti-Muslim sentiment and the anti-China sentiment. I think that's how the establishment is going to play the game. We shall see. We still have quite a bit of time, but I feel like things are lining up around Russia, Ukraine right now. Statements are being made, actions are being taken. They anticipate a Trump victory. I think Trump is going to win the upcoming election. I think that is the case. And honestly, I'll tell you this much, and this might be a long shot on my part. If Kamala Harris wins, I think she will also de-escalate the conflict in Ukraine. And I think that's the other thing, kind of like the Bay of Pigs invasion, that was planned by a Republican administration and then carried out in the first months of the Democrat Kennedy administration. I have a feeling that even if Kamala Harris wins, she will de-escalate the conflict in Ukraine because the deep state has already decided they've lost this one. And that's what I anticipate being the case. I think that even if Kamala Harris wins, the decisions have already been made. There's going to be a de-escalation in Ukraine, and that's why they're seething, and that's why they're angry. And that they wouldn't be seething and angry, and they wouldn't be conceding this point, and they wouldn't be allowing the debate to continue the way it is if they hadn't already kind of realized that they've lost. And this may be a strange way of understanding things, but I think a lot of the U.S. foreign policy apparatus operates, on the assumption that it doesn't matter who's in office, their operations will continue. And I think they are anticipating de-escalating the conflict in Ukraine. They're anticipating a Trump victory, but even if Kamala Harris wins, they will still de-escalate in Ukraine because they've already lost and because they've already spent billions of dollars. and because there's not enthusiasm for it around the world, and they're seething and they're shaking and they're blaming RT for it. But that brings me to another point, because when I'm on here talking to you all, I don't just talk about world events in a detached way about what might happen, what's happening, why it's happening, etc. I tend to talk about world events with the belief that we, as people living here in the United States with an anti-imperialist perspective, we can intervene. We can change the world. Our actions can make a difference. I strongly believe that our actions can make a difference. And I have published all kinds of books, and I've spent a long time educating all of you about why our actions make a difference. What can we do? I published a whole textbook, Out of the Movement to the Masses, Anti-Imperialist Organizing in America, about how is it that we can intervene and make a difference? How can we build the anti-imperialist movement that is needed? Right now, there's a division in the ruling class between the Eastern establishment and the ultra-rich, the tech monopolies and the oil giants, the oil bankers, and the bulk of the rich. There is a division. The ultra-rich and the lower levels of capital are fighting with one another, and that creates an opening for those of us who want to make a difference to do so. Right? Anti-imperialist and revolutionary politics in American history tends to involve the building of alliances. And there are two moments in American history where those of us with an anti-imperialist or anti-capitalist working class perspective have made a really big difference. And those two moments came the first was during the U.S. Civil War. And it's funny because this is something that a lot of people don't want to acknowledge. It threatens their worldview for a variety of reasons. But Karl Marx was a huge supporter of Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was president of the United States, and he was an anti-slavery president. He was the first president from the Republican Party, which was the anti-slavery party. Abraham Lincoln won the presidency. And in response to Abraham Lincoln getting elected, the slaveholders, which represented Wall Street and the Wall Street banks that insured slave exports, and Wall Street was an insurance place before it was a New York Stock Exchange. It was an insurance cartel center. Wall Street supported the slave owners, and London in particular supported the slave owners. The British Empire needed cheap cotton for their textile mills, and they saw the slave economy of the South that banned looms and opposed technological progress and kept the United States as an agrarian, non-industrialized country, and a very big section of it. The British Empire, that didn't want to have a competitor in the global markets, didn't want a strong industrialized America, but instead wanted lots of cheap cotton picked by slaves to set up their textile industries. They loved the Confederacy. And Wall Street, which was originally a slave auction center at one point. There's an African cemetery on Wall Street. There was a number of black people who were buried near Wall Street. But Wall Street, even after they got rid of slavery in New York, Wall Street was a center of insuring the slave trade. It was a center of insuring slave trade, with insurance cartels, etc. Wall Street was pro-Confederate, and New York City was a stronghold of pro-slavery sentiments during the U.S. Civil War. So Wall Street and London took one side. They were pro-slavery. But the bulk of the American economy, the industrialists, they took another position. They were opposed to slavery because they wanted to fully industrialize the United States. They didn't want to have a primitive economy in the South. In addition to that, they wanted the new territories that came into the United States, the new states that were joining the country, to be states where they could industrialize and they could help them grow. And the election of Abraham Lincoln was an alliance. It was an alliance of the industrialists who wanted a strong, prosperous economy in the northern part of America and in all of America. It was an alliance of the small farmers. They called the free soilers, the people that were settling Kansas and Nebraska. These small farmers who did not own slaves and did not believe in slavery but wanted to have land, wanted to have their own farms, right? The westward expanding small farmers and the labor unions. The labor unions that were emerging, labor unions were fighting for higher wages, and it's very hard to win higher wages when you're competing with people who work for free. Slaves. Slaves don't get paid at all. So if you're demanding higher wages and they can replace you with somebody who can work for free, that's not going to help you a lot. And if you look at the literature that was published in the lead up to the American Civil War, they pointed out that not only was slavery bad and genocidal for black people who were deprived of their basic human rights, it was also bad for workers in the South. The wages and living conditions of white workers in the South were drastically lower because of slavery, because they were competing with people who worked for free. And you can read, and there was a lot written about this. And Harriet Beecher Stowe, who wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, and a lot of the abolitionist literature pointed out that the entire U.S. economy was hurt. It was almost like the USA was trying to swim with a giant cement block tied to one of its feet. Slavery was preventing the United States from industrializing. And it was hurting the labor movement and the working class, and it was hurting the small farmers, and it was hurting the industrialists. The entire U.S. society was weakened. Wall Street was benefiting from slavery, and London was benefiting from slavery, and the small plantation-owning class, the elite Southern plantation-owning caste, they were benefiting from it, but everyone was losing out. And so an anti-monopoly coalition had to be built. It was the imperialists, it was the monopolists, it was the Wall Street bankers and the London Stock Exchange and the slave plantation oligarchy that was benefiting from slavery, but they had to build a popular front, a coalition to defeat slavery. And during that coalition, Marxists and socialists, they played a very important role. August Willich, look up August Willich. No one talks about August Willich. August Willich was a German man, a Marxist, a communist, and he moved to the United States from Germany, and he became a general in the Union Army. And why did he become a general in the Union Army? Because as a communist, he was opposed to slavery, and he was a big believer in labor unions, and the labor unions were opposed to slavery. So he and a bunch of other German guys who had moved to the United States from Germany, they formed the Ohio 9th Infantry Regiment as a division of the Union Army. And August Willich moved up to the rank of brigadier general in the Union Army. The Ohio 9th Infantry Regiment was formed by communists, German communists, who moved to the United States and fought in the Union Army. And they were key in a number of battles in the U.S. Civil War, and they ultimately played a role in the defeat of the Confederates. And among them, in addition, you had August Willich, who became a general. You also had Joseph Weydemeyer, right? You had Joseph Weydemeyer, right? And Joseph Weydemeyer, he was the one who did the bulk of the battlefield, leadership. He was the leader of the soldiers in battle, and they protected Missouri during the war. Hold on, I'm just trying to pull up a picture of Joseph Weydemeyer. Yes, here we go. This is Joseph Weydemeyer, and he was a communist who formed a Marxist, a communist division. He was part of the Ohio 9th Infantry Regiment. He was the battlefield commander. I will pull up his picture, and he led the Union Army in St. Louis, Missouri, and he protected St. Louis, Missouri, and he secured St. Louis, Missouri, and it was a strategic alliance, and he made a difference. And it wasn't just communists. Harriet Tubman became the first woman ever to lead U.S. soldiers into battle. Harriet Tubman, right? She was the black woman who led the Underground Railroad and spent her life smuggling slaves out of slavery. Harriet Tubman, she formed her own division of the Union Army, and they began liberating slaves in South Carolina. And, they liberated plantations. Harriet Tubman. She formed her own fighting force during the U.S. Civil War. And all of these people, these great revolutionaries like Harriet Tubman, these great revolutionaries like Joseph Wedemeyer and August Willich, they saw a division in the ruling class between the pro-slavery ultra-rich of Wall Street and London and the lower levels of capital, the industrialists, the small farmers, and others. And they said, this is an opening. We can intervene. And no, they didn't sit on the sidelines and go, oh, Lincoln's not a real revolutionary, because he wasn't. Lincoln didn't want to abolish slavery. Lincoln said if he could have been president without freeing a single slave, he would have done it. Lincoln said black people were inferior during the Lincoln-Douglas debates. Lincoln said that he just wanted to stop slavery from expanding. And so, Harriet Tubman and Joseph Wedemeyer and August Willich could have just sat back and said, oh, Lincoln's no good. He's not a real abolitionist. He's just sought. They could have said that, but then they wouldn't have made a difference. And when the Civil War broke out, one side was pro-slavery. The other side was anti-slavery. One side was racist. The other side was racist. One side was killing Native Americans. The other side was killing Native Americans. One side was led by wealthy capitalists. The other side was led by wealthy capitalists. There were absolutely awful things about the northern side of the Civil War. The industrial capitalists with their sweatshops and the, killing of Native Americans, all kinds of things. But there was a division. And instead of just sitting on the sidelines and throwing up their arms and saying, oh, they're both bad, we hate America, this is an evil, racist country, no, they intervened. And Harriet Tubman and Joseph Wedemeyer and August Willich intervened on the side of Abraham Lincoln. And Karl Marx intervened. Karl Marx was not living in the United States, but Karl Marx wrote for the anti-slavery newspaper of New York City. The New York Tribune was the Republican Party anti-slavery newspaper of New York City. And the only job that Karl Marx ever had, one of two jobs that Karl Marx had in his entire life. He was at one point, he worked for a railroad company, and they fired him because his writing was too sloppy. However, he also worked for the New York Tribune, and he wrote glowing articles about Abraham Lincoln for the New York Tribune, the New York City Republican Party newspaper. Karl Marx wrote for it. And he spoke of Abraham Lincoln in glowing terms as the single-minded son of the working class, rescuing an enchained race. Now, you've got to ask yourself, right? Do you think Karl Marx didn't realize that Abraham Lincoln was supported by all kinds of wealthy capitalists? Of course he did. Do you think Karl Marx didn't realize that Abraham Lincoln was killing Native Americans? Of course he did. But there was a division in the ruling class between the industrialists, who were anti-slavery, and the British Empire and Wall Street that were pro-slavery. And the way you make history is by seeing divisions within the ruling class and opening, and with those divisions, you intervene. And they intervened. They entered an alliance with Lincoln. And because of that alliance, what started out, Lincoln said he wouldn't have freed a single slave if he didn't have to. But what happened was that the South broke away from the country in order to preserve slavery. And in order to defeat the slave owners and keep the United States intact, they had no choice. They had to abolish slavery. And Abraham Lincoln passed the Emancipation Proclamation, and constitutional amendments were added, and slavery was overthrown. And people like Harriet Tubman and people like Thaddeus Stevens and people like August Willich and Joseph Wedemeyer had a lot to do with it, because they saw a division in the ruling class and they intervened. They entered history. They decided they wanted to make a difference. And then that brings me to another president of the United States. Not a Republican. Abraham Lincoln was a Republican. This guy was a Democrat. Roosevelt. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was president of the United States. He got elected president in 1932. And he became president in 1932. And the Communist Party called him a fascist. And he proposed the National Industrial Recovery Act, And that was a law that the Communist Party said was paving the way to fascism. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt was from one of the richest families in New York. He was a good friend of the Rockefeller oil bankers. And the Communist Party had been fighting against Roosevelt for their entire lives. They'd been fighting against him. He was a rich old money guy. He was the relative of another president. And Roosevelt was just a typical establishment politician, right? FDR was old money, a wealthy New York guy. He'd been a governor of New York, and he was a shitty governor of New York. And New York City is very corrupt, the urban political machines. And Roosevelt was just another president. And the communists called the National Industrial Recovery Act that he proposed a fascist piece of legislation. And the communists were not fans of his. The Great Depression was happening. People were starving in the streets. And in the first term of Roosevelt, the communists opposed Roosevelt vehemently. They called him a fascist, and they organized protests in the streets against him. And all across the country, communists led unemployment protests of hungry, unemployed people demanding unemployment insurance. And all across the country, communists organized labor unions, and they went on strike. And Roosevelt's administration tried to stop them from going on strike. And Francis Perkins, who was head of the labor relations of the Roosevelt administration, called them up and tried to get them to stop it. But the thing was, the communists were organizing all these big protests for the rights of the unemployed, for the rights of workers on the job. And the ruling class of the United States decided that maybe Roosevelt shouldn't be president anymore because he's not stopping the communist uprisings. He's not stopping the protests. And so even though Roosevelt was not a communist, even though Roosevelt was not doing anything to help the working families, there were people in the government who said maybe we ought to have a fascist dictatorship to crush all the communist strikes and protests. And it was revealed by Smedley Butler, leader of the U.S. Marine Corps. Smedley Butler, U.S. Marine Corps General Smedley Butler, revealed in testimony before the Congress that some of the wealthiest people in America, including the Morgans and Henry Ford, had approached him about overthrowing the government, about having a military coup. Smedley Butler testified before Congress about the business plot that Roosevelt, because he wasn't stopping the protests and he wasn't stopping the anti working class movements and protests that were taking place, there was this conspiracy to overthrow Roosevelt and replace Roosevelt with a fascist dictator who would crush the protests and crush the communists. And so Roosevelt was facing being overthrown. He was going to be overthrown. And Smedley Butler testified about how the rich people were going around to all the generals and going to the American Legion and talking. They were plotting a military coup. 1934, it was revealed that there was a conspiracy and that many among the rich and powerful wanted to set up a military dictatorship. And there was a division in the ruling class. Some in the ruling class wanted to establish a military dictatorship to overthrow Roosevelt, and others in the ruling class didn't. And Roosevelt didn't want to be overthrown. He wanted to maintain his office. He didn't want to be killed in some kind of fascist coup. And so in 1934, that was the summer that the communists shut down the United States. In San Francisco, they organized the dock workers to go on strike. In Minneapolis, they organized the Teamsters and the truck drivers to go on strike. And in Toledo, Ohio, they led the auto light workers to go on strike. And in all across the South, they were leading strikes among sharecroppers and tenant farmers. South Carolina declared a state of emergency. In the summer of 1934, the communists were leading all kinds of uprisings and protests, and the labor unions were on strike, and the workers were out there, and people were rebelling. And Roosevelt saw that they were going to overthrow him. They were ready to set up a military dictatorship. If Roosevelt if Roosevelt couldn't stop the communist uprisings and protests, they were going to overthrow him and install a military dictatorship, and the USA would have a military fascist coup. And so what did Roosevelt do? Roosevelt realized the only way that he could not be overthrown is to have the American people have his back. And so in 1935, Roosevelt got on television. Or there was no television back then. He got on the radio, and Roosevelt announced that he was planning to hire millions of unemployed people. And he created the Works Progress Administration. and he hired thousands of unemployed people. There were millions of people that were unemployed and starving, and Roosevelt, without the permission of Congress, gave them all jobs by creating the Works Progress Administration. And he hired millions of unemployed people to build bridges and hospitals and highways and post offices and all kinds of things. And he hired them because he was buying their votes. He knew that he needed people to have his back. He needed people to support him. And the labor unions were the ones that were facing being crushed. And so he passed the Wagner Act in 1935, and he declared that you have the right to join a union. You have the right to join a union. He passed a law called the Wagner Act, legalizing labor unions, saying that every American, no matter what state you're in, you have the right to join a labor union. Why was Roosevelt doing this? Because he was facing the threat of being overthrown. The same reason that Lincoln entered an alliance. Lincoln entered an alliance with the anti-slavery forces, with the labor unions, because he was facing a violent insurgency. The Confederates were trying to overthrow him and break apart the country, so he had to enter an alliance. Roosevelt was facing a military coup. There was a division in the ruling class. He was facing being overthrown, so he had to enter an alliance. And in 1935, he hired millions of unemployed people, and he said that you have the right to go on strike, and he passed the Wagner Act. And he ran for president in 1936. And in 1936, the communists supported Roosevelt. They ran their own candidate, Earl Browder, for president. But they basically said that Roosevelt was the anti-fascist candidate. In 1936, they ran their own candidate, Earl Browder, but the theme of his campaign was democracy or fascism, and the communists supported Roosevelt. And they supported Roosevelt, and because of that, Roosevelt had to pass pro-labor legislation. And Roosevelt won the 1936 presidential elections by a landslide because he was giving people jobs and he was, protecting labor unions. And so then, after Roosevelt won the election, there was layoffs and the workers started occupying their factories. And you had sit-down strikes. And Roosevelt got on the radio and he said that workers have the right to engage in sit-down strikes. And workers all across the country went on strike and occupied their workplaces after President Roosevelt told them that they had the right to do it. There was a division in the ruling class, and the communists used it to create industrial unions. And there was a strike wave in 1937. The sit-down strike wave was created because millions of working people entered a strategic alliance with Roosevelt against the factory owners. Roosevelt was aligned with the Rockefellers and the oil monopolies, and the people trying to overthrow him were the factory owners. And because the communists were the ones that built the labor unions, they were against the factory owners. And so they backed up Roosevelt, and Roosevelt actually sent the military to Flint, Michigan to support striking workers. And the military protected the striking workers in Flint, Michigan. 1936, 1937, there was a huge surge in membership of the Communist Party and membership of industrial unions. You had the Flint sit-down strike, you had the sit-down strike wave, all because there was a division within the ruling class. The ruling class was divided about, do we want a military dictatorship or not? And Roosevelt was against the military dictatorship, so he needed all the support he could get, and so he aligned with the communists. And Gilbert Green, a member of the Young Communist League, was invited to sleep over at the White House. And A. Philip Randolph and all kinds of important communist-aligned labor leaders met with Roosevelt at the White House. And we got unemployment insurance and Social Security. And we got the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act and the minimum wage, all because we entered a strategic alliance. There was a division in the ruling class. And that division in the ruling class created an opening for the working class, just like the division in the ruling class over slavery and the strategic alliance with Lincoln created an opening. The division in the ruling class over fascism and dictatorship and labor unions created an opening in the 1930s. This is how history is made. This is how radicals like you and me, like August Willich, like the Communist Party, like Harriet Tubman, like Gus Hall, like William Z. Foster, this is how we make history. When there's a division in the ruling class, we see the opening and we move in and we align with one side. and they have to give us things, and they need us because they need us to be on their side against the other faction. Divisions in the ruling class and strategic alliances are how we make ourselves important, and they open the door to mass movements. This is what I'm telling you. If you read the history of the Civil War and how the communists intervened, if you read the history of the 1930s and Roosevelt and how the communists intervened, or if you read the history of any revolution that has ever happened, any real socialist revolution that's ever happened, it always starts with a crisis in society. There's a big crisis in society, and that crisis in society leads to a division in the ruling class. And then the revolutionaries take one side in the division in the ruling class, and they become an important faction in mobilizing support for one side in the ruling class, and they make demands, and they push their own agenda, and they promote their own ideas, and they bring working people into motion, and they build up working class power. And this is actually in the Communist Manifesto. In the Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx talks about this very thing, that the capitalists fight among themselves, and in the process, they bring workers into politics by fighting their own battles, and they furnish the workers with the weapons to overthrow them. And that is the process through which this happens. And they build up their own forces. This is how history is made. So if we just sit on the sidelines and go, oh, Trump is just as bad. Trump is just as bad as Biden, and they're all awful. You're missing the point. Roosevelt was awful in a lot of ways. Lincoln was awful in a lot of ways. But there's a division right now in the ruling class. It's not about endorsing Trump. It's not about going out and campaigning for Trump or voting for Trump. It's about acknowledging that over the Ukraine thing, there's a division in the ruling class. And really, the division in the ruling class right now isn't even really about Ukraine. It's about growth. It's about the question of economic growth. The ultra monopolies, the ultra rich, don't believe in growth. They want to stop economic growth in order to stabilize society. They believe in degrowth, whereas the bulk of the capitalists just want to make money. They want to make money, and they're mad that the economy is not creating that. That's the division in the ruling class, growth versus degrowth. The ultra monopolies want stability, and they want to stop the economic crisis. They want to stop the rise of Russia and China and other countries around the world, so they believe in degrowth. Whereas the bulk of the ruling class just want to make money. Donald Trump just wants to make money. Donald Trump's name is on the side of buildings. Why is that? Because Donald Trump likes to be associated with building things. Donald Trump likes to brag about how rich he is because he wants to make money. Donald Trump represents the bulk of the American capitalists who just want to make money. Whereas the ultra monopolies, the oil bankers, the billionaire corporations, the Jeff Bezos and the Rockefellers and the DuPonts and the Carnegies and Bill Gates and the World Economic Forum, if you listen to what they're saying that growth must stop in the name of climate change, in the name of whatever. Growth must stop. And they're dreaming up all kinds of dark, sinister, fascist schemes in order to stop economic growth because of the fact that they believe that that the only way to stabilize society right now is to reduce consumption. This is what I talk about in this book. Go and read my book, Where is America Going? Marxism, MAGA, and the Coming Revolution. There is a division in the ruling class between the factions that want growth and the factions that want a heavily controlled, regulated degrowth to stabilize capitalism. And that creates an opening for us. That creates an opening for us to intervene. Because we believe in growth. We want our children to have a better life than we have. We want to see our incomes go up. We want to see our neighborhoods become more prosperous. We don't want a war with Russia and China. We want America to gain from this new economy that's rising around the world with Russia and China at the center of it and breaking out of this dying system. We need to build the anti-monopoly coalition. During the 1950s, the Communist Party of the United States, they said what their goal was to do, and it was to build the anti-monopoly coalition. They didn't want to defeat all capitalists. They didn't even want to overthrow all of capitalism. They just wanted to defeat imperialism. They wanted to defeat the big monopolies. and that the working class would be essential in defeating the big monopolies and building an alliance and defeating the power of the big monopolies, creating an anti-monopoly government would be the basis of bringing about socialism in America. That we could have a rationally organized, planned economy built on the basis of defeating the power of the big monopolies, building an anti-monopoly coalition. We're not against capitalism. We're against the monopolies. We're against the imperialists. And the bulk of the American capitalists don't really care about Russia. They don't want to have a war with Russia. Donald Trump is tired of this. He wants it to end. The people who own the businesses and the stores in your neighborhood, the people who own the hotel chains, the bulk of the American capitalists don't care about Russia. They just want to make money. The people that want World War III right now are the same people that want tech censorship, are the same people that want to reduce your income and your living standards, are the same people that want a police state in your neighborhood. We are fighting against the monopolists. We are fighting against the imperialists. We're fighting against the ultra-rich. And we need to build an anti-monopoly coalition to defeat the power of the ultra-rich and rejuvenate the American economy. And that is what I am trying to tell you. And if we just sit back and say, oh, Donald Trump is just as bad as Kamala Harris, you're missing the point. It's not about Trump being good in his soul and being a good guy. And it's not about Kamala Harris being bad. I think she is very bad. It's about the fact that there is a division within the ruling class. And it's about the fact that the only way that Donald Trump is going to be able to get economic growth and make America great again and make the country prosperous again is to defeat the power of the big monopolies. Only defeating the power of the big monopolies can make America great again. And if Donald Trump wants to make lots of money and a lot of people to go sleep in his hotels and pay lots of money, he's going to have the economy stabilized. And in order to do that, he's going to have to cut into the power of the ultra-rich. There's a division right now in the ruling class. There was a division between Lincoln and the industrialists and the slaveholders in the British Empire. There was a division between Roosevelt and his allies and the oil companies, the Rockefellers, and the factory owners who wanted fascism. And when there's a division, that creates an opening for us to intervene. And that is what I want you all to understand. There is a division in the ruling class. There is an anti-growth, pro-war faction, the globalists, the ultra-rich, and there is the bulk of the capitalist class. And I'm repeating myself because I want you all to get it. I want you all to get it, right? I'm tired of the kindergarten communism. I really am. I'm really tired of people who go, well, Donald Trump is a capitalist. Okay, yes. And Roosevelt was a capitalist, and Lincoln was a capitalist. And the way we made history is by entering strategic alliances and opening. And this is, Marx talks about this. Capital, right? This is a book called Capital. Go and read the final sections of Capital and read about the origins, the very first working class movement in Britain. Where did it come from? There is a divide between the factory-owning capitalists and the land-owning capitalists. And the factory-owning capitalists were very against labor unions, and they wanted to make profits off of workers, and they wanted to pay them as little as possible. But the land-owning capitalists needed people to pay their rent, needed to pay rent to live on the land. And so there was a fight. And so the land-owning capitalists started funding the Chartist movement, which was a movement that said there should be a 12-hour workday, there should be a minimum wage. And with the money that came from the land-owning capitalists, the first labor unions in Britain were created. And the first working class movement in history, the Chartist movement, began because of a division in the ruling class. The Russian Revolution, it happened because of a division in the ruling class, because Russia was involved in a war called World War I. And that war was with their neighbor, the Germans. And a lot of Russian capitalists didn't want to fight the Germans. They wanted to make money trading with them. And there was a division in the ruling class. And at first, they thought that the Tsar was incompetent because he was losing the war. So they overthrew the Tsar. And workers went out and protested, and they struck, and they overthrew the Tsar. But then the new government that came in, the provisional government, was continuing the war. And there were a lot of people in Russia who wanted to end the war. And so they led strikes. There were the July days, they were called, where the workers were going out on strike, down with the war. We don't want to fight the war. And the Bolsheviks were leading strikes against the war, and they were fighting against the government. And so then the leader of the military, Kornilov, decided that he was going to create a military dictatorship and end the anti-war protests and strikes led by the Bolsheviks. And so Kornilov started marching towards St. Petersburg to declare himself the military dictator and impose a very vigorous fighting of World War I to crush anti-war dissent. And the provisional government realized it was going to be overthrown. And so it opened up the armories and it gave the guns to the Bolsheviks, and the Bolsheviks militia was mobilized to defend the provisional government from Kornilov. And Kornilov saw that the Bolsheviks had built up this huge militia, and they dug trenches and they'd surrounded the city with barbed wire, and they were ready to fight Kornilov on every rooftop and etc. And so Kornilov turned around and he stopped his effort to create a military dictatorship, and he started marching back towards the front. And at that point, the Kornilov reaction, Kornilov's attempt to become military dictator, was defeated. And at that point, the Bolsheviks had a bigger army and a bigger militia than the regular government did. So in October, they declared themselves the new government, and they created the Soviet Union. It was through a series of alliances in a division in the ruling class. There was a division over World War I. The Bolsheviks were the anti-war guys. And because they were the anti-war guys, they built up a mass movement against the war. They were aligned with capitalists who were against the war. They gave voice to the anti-war sentiments of the bulk of the population. And they ultimately were able to take power. And the Chinese Revolution is a similar story. You can go down the line. It is because of these divisions in the ruling class and because of the need of different factions in the ruling class to build up a mass movement to defeat the other capitalists that creates an opening for those of us who genuinely want a new society to emerge. We have to take advantage of disagreements in the ruling class if we want to get anything done. All right, this is what I'm trying to tell you all. And there's a huge division in the ruling class. And Donald Trump represents the faction that doesn't want war with Russia and wants economic growth. And we don't want war with Russia, and we want economic growth. So it makes sense that we would enter a strategic alliance and build up an anti-war movement and build up a pro-growth, patriotic working class movement. We would use this opportunity to build up a pro-working class, pro-American, pro-economic growth movement against war and against the globalists. This is our opportunity. And that's what we are doing with the Center for Political Innovation. And that brings me to another point, which is, why are we calling ourselves innovationists? Why are we not trying to own the word communism? Well, this is very interesting. I'm going to tell you a little story about a man named Vladimir Lenin. Vladimir Lenin was a Marxist, and he was a member of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party. And the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party taught him everything he knew. And he studied Marx, and he learned from the leader of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, a guy named Plekhanov. Plekhanov taught Lenin Marxism, translated Karl Marx's works into Russian, and Lenin was a great leader and organizer and writer for the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party. And if you walked up to Vladimir Lenin and asked him what movement he believed in, he would have said, "Why, I believe in social democracy." And if you read Lenin's old pamphlets, he calls himself a social democrat, right? He's got a pamphlet, 2 Tactics in the Social Democratic Revolution, the movement of social democracy. If you read what is to be done, you read all of his literature, he refers to himself as a social democrat. He refers to his movement as the Social Democratic Movement, because that's what the Marxists of Russia called themselves. They called themselves social democrats. And Lenin was a social democrat. But Lenin realized that the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party sucked. It sucked. What they would do is whenever there was a strike or a rebellion, they would run after it and say, "We agree with you." And they engaged in tailism, and they bowed to spontaneity, and they weren't really getting the job done. And so Lenin came up with a plan to build a whole new type of party, a party of new type, he called it, a new type of political party. and he presented it to all the other members of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party. And some of the people agreed with him and some of them didn't. And so they split. And the people that agreed with Lenin's plan, they still called themselves Social Democrats. They were the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party majority group, Bolshevik. And those who didn't agree with it were the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party Menshevik, or minority group. And they still called themselves Social Democrats, but there were two types of Social Democrats. There were Social Democrats with Plekhanov, and there were Social Democrats with the Bolsheviks and with Lenin. And that continued. But then Lenin developed all kinds of new theories. Not only did he have this new plan about how to build a party, he realized that they were not just fighting against regular capitalism, they were fighting against imperialism. And he came up with this theory of imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. And he said, actually, capitalism has entered this monopolistic stage of imperialism. And then he realized that, nationalism of people that are fighting imperialism, the Irish people fighting the British Empire, Marx embraced that nationalism. And the nationalism of the Polish people fighting against the empires that are oppressing them, that's good. So he embraced nationalism. And people noticed that the beliefs of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party Bolshevik were quite different than the other Social Democrats. But the Bolsheviks insisted we're the true Social Democrats. Those other guys, they're the phony Social Democrats. We're the real Social Democrats. But then World War I happened. And all the Social Democrats of Germany, the Social Democrats of England and the Labor Party, the Social Democrats in France, all the Marxists and Social Democrats of the world, they'd all promised they would never support a war, but they all sold out and they supported the war. And World War I happened and Lenin was furious. He said, how can we have this happen? How can they support this ugly war? They should be protesting against World War I. But all the big social democratic parties and the Mensheviks, the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party and the German Social Democrats, they all supported the war. And at that moment, Lenin did a double take. And he said, I'm doing something different here. I call myself a social democrat. I read the same books as these people. But what I believe is very, very different than what these people believe. We have the same name. We're both called social democrats. And we both read the same books by Marx. But these people sold out and supported World War I. And I didn't. And I believe that nationalism of oppressed people is a good thing. And I think that capitalism has entered this stage called imperialism, a special stage. We're not fighting regular capitalism, we're fighting imperialism. And I think that we need a special kind of party, a party of new type. And my beliefs are so different than regular social democracy that I'm doing something different. And so in April of 1917, Lenin showed up in Russia. He'd been living in exile in Switzerland, but the German intelligence basically put him on a train and transported him back to Russia. And when he showed up, he presented a document called the April Thesis. And in that document, he said, we're not going to call ourselves social democrats any longer. We're doing something different. We're not doing what these other groups are doing. These other groups are supporting World War I. We're opposing it. These other groups are saying all nationalism is reactionary. We support nationalism of the oppressed. These other groups have free-forming associations. We have a party of new type. These other groups are fighting against capitalism, just all capitalism. We're fighting against imperialism. And we align with capitalists to fight imperialism. So we're actually, even though we started out being the same as these people, but sort of having a different interpretation, even though we started out calling these people sellouts and saying that we're the true social democrats, it's gotten to the point we're just doing a completely different thing here. There's a fundamental difference between them and us. So why should we go around trying to tell everyone we're the real social democrats? If anything, we should just give ourselves a new name. And Lenin made clear in his April Thesis, they didn't call themselves social democrats any longer because the working class hated the social democrats, because the social democrats supported the war and sold them down the river. And the social democrat labor union leaders were a bunch of corrupt, pushovers. And he said, we don't want the working people who hate the war and hate the reformist labor unions. We don't want them to think we're the same as those social democrats. So we're going to use a new name. We're going to call ourselves communists because what we are doing is fundamentally different than what the social democrats are doing. And so they started calling themselves the communists. And that's why there was the Communist International, the Communist Party separate from the Socialist Party, the Communist Party separate from the Social Democrats. They came to the conclusion, oh shit, even though we think we're the most correct interpreters, even though we think we're doing the right thing, at this point, we are doing something so fundamentally different than what these other people are doing. And the working class people hate these other people because they're frauds and phonies and liars that are leading them off a cliff. Rather than fighting to be the real social democrats, we have to have a new name. And so they became the communists. Now I'm going to tell you another story from thousands of years before that. I'm going to tell you a story about a guy named the Apostle Paul. This is an interesting story, right? Well, first we'll start out, there was a guy named Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ, he had a movement of people, and they were Jews. And in fact, they called Jesus Christ, their leader, Rabbi. And he was called Rabbi. And they were a Jewish movement. And Jesus led a group of people, all of whom were Jewish, and they called their leader Rabbi, and they invoked Moses and the scriptures. And Jesus was going around saying, if you'd have asked Jesus what he believed in, he would have said, Judaism. That's what I believe in. In fact, he told his followers, we don't want to recruit non-Jews. We want to recruit the lost sheep of Israel. We're here to restore the Old Testament. We're here to restore the law. He said, I bring with me the law of Moses, the law of the Old Testament. Jesus was running around starting a form of Judaism that he started. And that's what Jesus did. And he formed a form of Judaism. And he was crucified for it. And he was killed, rose again, etc. And his followers, the disciples, they were forming a religion that was a form of Judaism. And then there was this guy named Paul, the Apostle Paul. And the Apostle Paul was a Jewish guy who hated the followers of Jesus. And he went around persecuting them. And he went around helping the Romans persecute them. And one day he was riding his horse, and he fell off of his horse, and he had a vision. And Jesus' face came to him in the vision and said, why are you persecuting me? And the Apostle Paul, this Jewish guy who'd been persecuting other Jews who followed a specific type of Judaism called a specific type of Judaism, that followed this rabbi named Jesus, they dropped it. He stopped persecuting them, and he converted to being a follower of Jesus. And he started recruiting people. But then he realized that they had a little bit of a problem recruiting people, which is that in order to convert to Judaism, you have to get circumcised. You have to get circumcised in order to become Jewish. That's not a very good advertisement. If someone comes to your house and says, all right, you want to join a new religion, sounds really, really great. And then they get to the part of, and now as an adult male, I have to circumcise you. You might change your view. And the place where this particular form of Judaism was very popular was Rome. In fact, Rome is where it really caught on. The city of Rome, there were a lot of Jews who moved to the city of Rome. And, and they were very, very much like the message of Jesus. And on top of that, Jesus said a lot of things that went against Judaism. In Judaism, the Sabbath is sacred, and there's a list of rules that you have to do on the Sabbath. But Jesus said the Sabbath was created for man. Man was not created for the Sabbath. And Jesus went as far as breaking those rules and healing people and performing miracles on the Sabbath. And on top of that, Jesus instructed his followers to go make disciples of all nations. And in order to convert to Judaism, you have to ask. Jews are not supposed to recruit, right? Judaism is not supposed to proselytize to non-Jews. It's not supposed to recruit. And on top of that, Judaism, you have to ask 3 times to join, and then you have to get circumcised if you're a male. And and they really don't emphasize recruitment. But Jesus said, go and make disciples of all nations, recruit everybody. And then the Apostle Paul realized, oh, what we think is so different than what the other Jews believe. And, you know, we think that the Sabbath was created for man and man was not created for the Sabbath. We think it was totally cool for Jesus to heal people on the Sabbath. On top of that, we also, want to recruit people in mass, and this whole circumcision thing is a little bit of a problem. And we actually believe that Jesus was the Messiah and the Son of God. And Jews say the Messiah won't come until the end times, and he'll be a big military leader and all of that. And so, you know what? We're kind of doing something different here. And if you go read the New Testament, go and read the epistles, all written by the Apostle Paul, where he basically says, yeah, we're not Jews anymore. You know, Jesus started this movement out as like a weird form of Judaism, but actually, we're doing something different. And you know what? You can be circumcised in the spirit. You don't have to get circumcised to be a Christian. You know what? You don't have to be circumcised. And you know what? Jesus came for all mankind. And you know, we're not Jews anymore. We're starting a new religion. It's called Christianity. And it took them a long time to realize that what they were doing was fundamentally different. But it got to the point during the life of the Apostle Paul, he realized, oh, wow, what we're doing here, it might have started out as Judaism, but it's taken such a different turn. What we believe is so fundamentally different than what the Jews believe. We're just a new religion now. And for a while, for the early years of Christianity, they were angrily arguing, we're the real Jews. And Jesus is the Messiah. We are the real Jews. But then they realized after a while, yeah, we might feel like the Jews that are practicing regular Judaism have sold out. Yeah, we might believe that we have the correct interpretation of the Old Testament and all of that. But we're doing something so fundamentally different than what they're doing. We don't think you have to get circumcised. We say you can be circumcised in the spirit. And we want to recruit the people, make disciples of all nations. We want to spread Jesus' message to everybody. And we don't believe in this rigid list of rules. We say that the Sabbath was made for man and man was not made for the Sabbath. We're doing something different here. And so rather than go around and demand that everybody get circumcised, and rather than tell people that we're Jews, but we're the real Jews, the others are a bunch of phonies who didn't follow the Messiah, why don't we just give it a new name? Why don't we just call ourselves something different? Because what we're doing at this point is so different than what everybody thinks Judaism is. And yes, we might think we're the true Jews, but there's a lot of other Jews out there who don't think that. And there's no point. Why don't we just change what we are? Why don't we just give ourselves a new name? Because what we're selling a product here called Christian. We're selling a product here. And the product that we're selling is so different. It would be like a store. And it's the same thing with Lenin, right? If you went to a store and you asked for orange juice and somebody gave you grape juice, you would say, no, I'm looking for orange juice. And if the person behind the counter said, well, this grape juice is real orange juice. This is real orange juice. You would say to them, I don't give a fuck if it's real orange juice. I want orange juice that tastes like orange juice. And the person says, no, I've studied plants and all of that, and real orange juice tastes like grape juice. And the person would say to them, I don't care. I don't care about all your intellectual crap. If it's real orange juice, I don't care. I came to this store looking for orange juice, and I want you to give me what I think orange juice is. Right? And that's the situation, right? The bulk of people in Russia in 1917, they knew what social democracy was. And so when they went looking for social democracy, they were looking for one thing, and the Bolsheviks were selling a completely different product. And if people went to the Bolsheviks looking for social democracy, they were going to be very disappointed, right? And in ancient times, in the time of the origin of Christianity, when people were looking for Judaism, if they had gone to the Apostle Paul, if they'd have gone to, the early Christian church and said, all right, we're looking for Judaism, they would have been very, very disappointed with what they found because it was something fundamentally different. And so you get to a point where you realize, oh, If people come to me wanting to buy orange juice, and instead I tell them real orange juice is grape juice, I've got a little bit of a problem, right? If I'm selling people apples and people come to me and I put up a sign that says, oranges, and people come and they want to buy an apple from me, but they're expecting an orange, there's a problem, right? And you get to the point where you realize that if everyone is expecting one thing from you, and what you are offering is so fundamentally different from what they're expecting, you have to change, right? Christianity, in order to be what it was, had to stop calling itself Judaism. Yes, the early Christians felt that they were the true inheritors of Judaism. Yes, they believed Jesus was the Messiah of the Jews. Yes, they believed that the rabbis and the Sanhedrin were sellouts. They believed all of that. But it got to the point where what they believed was so fundamentally different that there was no point in trying to fight to maintain the belief that they were the true Jews. Instead, it was time to just say, we're a whole new religion, we're Christianity. And the same with the Bolsheviks. It got to the point where, yes, the Bolsheviks felt they were the true interpreters of Karl Marx. They felt that they were the true social democrats. They felt that Plekhanov and Kautsky had sold out. They were the true Marxists. They were the true social democrats. But it got to the point that what they were offering was so fundamentally different from what everyone thought social democracy was, that they just had to change their name. They just had to accept that. That is the position that we are in our time. And forgive me if you feel my analogies were grandiose. I'm not here to, put on a display of humility. I'm here to tell you that if we continue calling ourselves communists in America in the year of 2024, that would be the equivalent of Lenin calling himself a social democrat in 1917, or it'd be the equivalent of Apostle Paul calling himself a Jew in the time when the early Christian church was rising. What we are offering is so different from what communists offer in the United States that there is no point. And yes, we can argue we have the correct interpretation. Sure. I think that Lenin and Marx and all of that was anti-imperialist, and these people are not anti-imperialists. So yes, I am a true Marxist. I am a true Marxist-Leninist in that I am anti-imperialist, and they're not. And yes, I will maintain that the people speaking in the name of communism, the Communist Party USA, and all these other groups, they are sellouts and they are phonies. And that I believe what they're supposed to believe and that they're phonies, sure. But it has gotten to the point that average people, when they hear communist, they think they're getting an orange. And I've got an apple. It's gotten to the point that when average people hear communism, they expect orange juice, and I've got grape juice. And by going around and trying to claim that I am the real communist, I am only doing a disservice to the people I speak to, and I am only doing a disservice to the people I'm trying to win over and to the people I'm trying to organize. And I'm only confusing people, because what people who go looking for communism are looking for, I don't offer. What the masses of people think communism is, I am not that, and I'm not trying to sell that to them. And so I am at the point where it's gotten to the point where it is just poor marketing. It is just stupid. There's a reason that Lenin didn't go around calling himself a social democrat. He just said, we're going to be a new thing. We're communists. There's a reason the Apostle Paul didn't go around saying, well, I'm the true Jew. He just said, you know what? We're doing something different. We're Christians, right? There comes a time where what we believe is so fundamentally different than what the others believe, and we don't have the ability to define the word, that trying to fight to own a word is just a waste of your time. It confuses the masses. It confuses your organizers. It confuses everybody. Do I want people in the old communist groups to join us? Yes. And do I feel that I am way more correct in my interpretation of Marxism than they are? Yes. But do I feel like I need to hold on to the communism label that the masses don't understand and that the communists themselves don't understand? No. It's gotten to the point that we need to just move on from the word communism. Because what we are offering here is a different product. There are fundamental differences between us and communists. And I am with you that those differences show that we're more true to the principles behind communism than they are. But regardless, there are some fundamental differences. Let me tell you what we believe and what communists don't believe. Number one, we believe in economic growth. We believe that the way to achieve the higher stage of communism is what Marx said: when the springs of cooperative wealth flow more abundantly, when labor becomes life's prime want. We believe in economic growth. We believe in expansion of living standards. And Marx believed that, and Lenin believed that. But regardless, communists think wealth is bad. They think that having money is bad. They think that we want everyone to be poor and like it, and that wanting wealth and wanting money and wanting economic growth is the problem with capitalism, and that we should have degrowth. And they are in alliance with the ultra-rich fascists who are trying to impose degrowth. And they support Kamala Harris, and they support all kinds of schemes to enact degrowth. We don't believe in degrowth. That is a fundamental difference. And I think we are correct in interpreting Marx the way we do. But regardless, communists believe in degrowth. The masses associate communists with degrowth on the one hand, and the communists themselves are promoting degrowth, and we are opposing degrowth. Second, we are anti-imperialists. We are not opposed to regular capitalism. We want to align with regular capitalists in order to fight imperialism. And, just like the Bolsheviks armed the Emir of Afghanistan to fight against the British Empire, we want to align with anybody who will oppose imperialism. Just like Karl Marx's daughter, Jenny Marx, wore a crucifix around her neck to support the Irish people in their Irish freedom struggle, we want to support anyone who's fighting the imperialists. However, the bulk of the communists think that imperialism just means country do bad thing. They don't see imperialism as a system. And they think that the majority, they think that Russia fighting the imperialists, Iran fighting the imperialists, China fighting the imperialists, all these forces are not real communists, so they support the imperialists against them, or at best they're neutral. Well, that's not us. We are anti-imperialists to our core. We believe in economic growth, and we are anti-imperialists, and the communists are not. Third, we love the masses of people. We absolutely love the masses of people. Hold on. We love the masses of people. And because we love the masses of people, right, we want to mobilize them and fight for them. We want to champion them. We view the masses of people as the heroes, and that's in the Little Red Book. The masses of people are the real heroes. We don't hate the people. And yes, that is the correct Marxist position. But at the same time, that is not what communists believe. Communists believe the people are the enemy, the people are ignorant, the people are inferior, etc. All right, well, we love the people. And it's getting to the point that what we believe is so much of a departure from what communists believe, at least in America, there's really no point in fighting to try and own a word. At this point, calling ourselves innovationists and declaring ourselves to be the innovationist movement is the best bet. Because there gets to be a point where you're doing something that is so fundamentally different. And that's where I'm at. That's where I'm at. So, folks, I am going to take a little bit of a break. I'm going to put on a song, right? I think I can put this song on. I have to take care of something. I'm going to put on a song, then we'll do the roll call, and then I will start answering your super chat questions. So if you have something you'd like us to talk about in the second half, I see we got 4 super chats here already. Send in some super chats, get me talking. The night is young. I've still got another good 2 hours in me. So please give me something to talk about in the second half. I think I can put on, let me see the song I want to put on, right? But send in your super chats, folks. Yes, this is the song I want to put on. All right, I'm going to put on the China song from Prairie Fire, and then I will be back. I will do the roll call, and then I'll answer your questions.
Got to the border, we began to walk on the 2 flags flying over the bridge we were to cross. One was the bloody British rag of imperialism, casting its shadow over poverty, starvation, vicious exploitation in Hong Kong. The other was the flaming red flag of revolution and socialism, telling us all, the people of the world, the time has come to come along. This ain't just any old border that we are standing on. It stands between 2 systems, one dying, one young and strong. And then we crossed that bridge into China, saw a great banner up ahead. Its meaning set my heart a pounding, and this is what that banner is. Long live the great unity of the peoples of the world. Long live the great unity of the peoples of the world. Went to a steel mill, saw people working hard, but there were no bosses. The workers ran the job. They worked 10 hours, 6 days a week, on great machines built by their own hand. They labored not for some rich man's profits, but to meet the needs of people of the land. And they are building with such a spirit of revolution and socialism, for they are masters of their own future. The working class is in command. Talked with an older worker. He said many worries are gone. If one is sick or injured, they are provided for. We have no fear of rising prices, no unemployment will you find. There's always more to be done to build China, not just for us but to free mankind. Long live the People's Republic, long live working class rule. Long live the People's Republic, long live working class rule. We arrived in Shanghai, where before it was free. Dope and prostitution and starving people filled the streets. And now these people stand up united, providing for the needs of all. Decent housing, health care, education, they decide, now they are the law. And man, I felt so damn proud of China. women now working side by side, about our many struggles for freedom so long denied. They said, comrades, China is with you. This is your country as well as ours. The struggles of the people united will be triumphant. We have the power. Long live the great unity, yeah, of the peoples of the world. Long live the great unity of the peoples of the world. No, I missed my family. Wish they were there with me. I knew they're back home struggling to change society. And I admit I hated to leave China. You know that freedom kinda grows on you. But now I feel such deep determination to do the job we all have to do. Remember, people, our day's coming. Make revolution, build socialism, to do away with class exploitation, to end oppression once and for all. And I had learned a lesson that I will always heed. The fight to end oppression, the working class must lead. For we will build us up a great movement to sweep away the system we're in. And nothing gonna stop us from doing it. We will fight and we will win. Long live the People's Republic. Long live working class rule. Long live the People's Republic. Long live working class rule.
All righty. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. Who is with us? Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Who is with us? Zach in Barcelona. Welcome. Oh, sorry. Welcome, Zach. Rice from Adelaide, Australia. Brooklyn in the house. Philip High. Carolina in Berlin, Germany. JT24 in Mississippi. William in London. Lawrence Johnson in Chicago. Courtney in Northern Virginia. Ryan in Kansas City. Welcome, Ryan. Carter in Minnesota. Welcome, Carter. Tony in Tasmania. Welcome. Utica, New York. Me, Hillary in Wales. Rachel in Georgia. Jenny in Cincinnati. Hello from Seymour. Matt in Tutusville. John in Switzerland. Chris in Salt Lake City. Dan in the Los Angeles area. Patch in Arizona. Bendigo, Australia. David Fox. Alex in Brazil. Dustin Schlesinger. Orlando, Florida Republic. Welcome, welcome, welcome. New comments. Daniel from Madrid. Tony in Toronto. Noah in Boston. Auckland, New Zealand. Dustin Schlesinger in Cleveland. Orlando. Steve and Ann in Ringgold, Georgia. Welcome, Steve and Ann. Good to have you with us. Bartek in Anaheim, California. Danny in upstate New York. Toey in Sweden. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Names and locations. Names and locations. Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. Esther, Ireland, Free State of Dublin. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us? What is your advice for a young person with your political views? I meet most people around me that don't tolerate my politics. I have to stay closeted, especially around suburban liberals. Love what CPI is doing. Very good. Folks, I have to pause this for 1 second. All is well, folks. Just had to deal with a household issue. But all is well. All is well. Sorry. Hey, I have a life. I have a wife. I have a family. And, sometimes you got to deal with things. But there you go. I'm back. So I do appreciate your message, Gala. And, I do want to remind everybody to tune in to the morning messages. We have a great morning message tomorrow from a very beloved member of our community. I'm not going to give away who it is. You have to tune in and watch. But it's a great message. And I hope that you watch. The morning messages are on the YouTube channel of the Center for Political Innovation. And we now have a mechanism through which you can make your own morning messages. You can send your own morning messages. So we would like you to do that with this link. You can make your own morning messages. So please submit a morning message. We want everyone to be able to start their day with revolutionary hope and optimism. That is what we want for you. As a member of our community, we want you to be able to start your day with revolutionary hope and optimism. And so submit a morning message, record yourself. A lot of people are doing it and stepping up to the plate, and we got to keep the rhythm going, right? We got to keep the rhythm going. Tune in for the morning messages every morning from a different member of CPI. So I am going to start answering people's super chat questions. But keep them rolling in because the night is young. I've got another good 2 hours in me. And I've got, plenty to say, and I'm here to answer your questions. Right? We have an insane elite in this country that is trying to drive us toward a new world war with Russia. We've got to build an anti-imperialist movement. There's an urgency to what we're doing, but there's an honesty to what we're doing. Ellie in Chicago. Very true. All right. So first question, which was sent twice, John. John Keys said, how many hours a day do you read/study, talk about? Well, for me, right, I realize that I am not normal in the sense that I am obsessed with this. I look at this bookshelf behind me. The amount of books in this apartment drives my wife crazy. I'm thinking about this 24 hours a day in a way that other people are not. I am extremely focused, and other people find that to be very annoying. I'll be honest with you. I am thinking about politics and history and world events, and I'm thinking about CPI and our organization and what our goals are, and I'm thinking about these things in a way that other people are not. And I don't expect everyone to do that. And, that's just kind of the way I am. And that's just, it is what it is. So I don't time it. I just do it. Right, John? I wish I could tell you, oh, yes, I spend 2 hours a day doing that. I spend 2 hours a day doing that. It's not like that for me. I do make deadlines for projects. That's one thing I've learned to do. I do make lists of things that need to be done. I sat down today and I made a timeline of everything that needs to happen. In the next couple months, I made a date that everything needs to happen by. I do make deadlines for myself in order to get things done. And thank you, Daniel. I will answer your question. And thank you. We do appreciate the super chats. They help make this show happen. I do make deadlines for myself. I make to-do lists. I do require myself to study certain things, to keep abreast of world events. And I do my job as an RT reporter. That's helpful. So between all of that, I do what I need to do, and I'm thinking constantly, and I'm in touch with other people constantly. And there's people in my life that are friends that inform me about things, and they're very interested as well. And they'll call me and they'll say, hey, did you just see blah, 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 blah happened? Very helpful. I tend to find topics I get really interested in and I read on them. The other thing is I don't read books cover to cover, right? I read books, I get what I need out of them, right? Especially nonfiction books, right? And that's something that a lot of people don't get. If you give a lot of people a book, they go, oh, I have to read the whole thing. It's not like that for me. I tend to read from the book what I want. I skip through, I read different sections, I use the index, I use the table of contents, and that's kind of more how academics read books. That's how I've always read books. So there you go. But I very much like certain writing styles. There are certain writing styles I really, really enjoy. And I often will imagine while I am writing or while I'm reading, how could I explain this to somebody? Right? If I'm reading a book, and I want to explain the concept. I imagine there's a friend sitting next to me or somebody I know, and I'm saying, well, actually, I'm explaining to them what I'm reading, and that helps me to comprehend things. If I imagine I'm explaining it to somebody, if that helps. So there you go. I often think, how would I put this into words, right? If I were explaining this to somebody, how would I do it? So I hope that's helpful, John. India and Armenia are supplying Ukraine. Russia didn't use nukes on Sweden and Finland for NATO application or Ukraine's invasion. I mean, the idea that Russia is going to nuke everybody, right? They've been playing up that idea for a really, really long time. This idea that, Russia has said that if they're invaded, that's a circumstance in which they have the right to use nuclear weapons. And right now they are being invaded, right? There's the Kursk incursion. I mean, they're being invaded. And, there are certain criteria, certain moments where they said we would use nukes. One of them is that someone's nuking them. Another one is that there's a direct invasion. Right now, there is a direct invasion of their country. They're not nuking people, even though their criteria says that. But ever since the beginning of this conflict, there's been all these people playing up the idea Russia's going to nuke everybody. They're just going to nuke everybody. It's like, that's not what they said. They have a list of times in which they have the right. They say they would use their nuclear weapons. They wouldn't use them under most circumstances. One of those circumstances is a foreign invasion. They are facing a foreign invasion right now, not just in the territories that have joined with Russia, the Donbass, the new republics, but also the Kursk incursion. But they still are not using nuclear weapons. They're exercising restraint. And Russia is not threatening to nuke the world. And, it is the United States that was talking with Ukraine about getting Ukraine to have nuclear weapons. It wasn't enough to just, have Ukraine be toppled and have a fanatically anti-Russian government right on Russia's border. Well, that wasn't enough. They were openly talking about Ukraine getting nuclear weapons. If the USA can invade Iraq on the other side of the world, because it says that Iraq has nuclear weapons. This is what Putin said when I spoke with him. He said if the USA invaded Iraq, claiming that they might be getting weapons of mass destruction, and they're on the other side of the world, we're dealing with a country right on our border, a fanatically anti-Russian government right on our border that's openly talking about getting nuclear weapons. It's a different situation. And, there's so much just blatant dishonesty about the Ukraine situation in American media. It makes my head spin. They just want you to know nothing about it, and then they want to pluck your heartstrings. And it's very infuriating. It's absolutely infuriating. All right. What does the Epstein scandal say about the elite? Well, James, I see the Epstein scandal as not much saying much about the elite themselves, but about how they control their functionaries. There's the Epstein scandal. So you had Jeffrey Epstein, who was this Wall Street banker, this wealthy Wall Street guy, and he had a harem of underage girls, and he was going around to politicians and others and, letting them have a taste of it. And he was video recording the whole thing and using it for blackmail. And I think this reveals an aspect. A lot of people have theorized there may be a lot more pedophiles among the elite than we realize, because that is such an awful thing. You can control somebody. If you know that somebody's a pedophile, you got something on them, you can control them. Right? And there may be a lot more pedophiles among the elite than we realize. There may be, that they want people that they can control. They want people that they can have leverage over. And that it appears that this Epstein fellow was getting leverage over rich and powerful people, former presidents, members of Congress. He was getting them into compromising circumstances so he could have leverage over them. That seems to be what he was doing, right? He was using underage girls to get politicians in compromising circumstances. Whitney Webb is the journalist who's done the most research. She maintains he was doing it for Israel, for Mossad. And I think that's very, very, very possible. And I mean, if you think he killed himself, you are delusional. He did not kill himself, right? I mean, the circumstances of his death are really suspicious. So tell us about your ring. Well, when I went to Iran, I saw that all the men, particularly the religious men, were wearing rings like this. And it got to the point that, I wanted to know what it was. So I looked it up. And the ring I found out is that the tradition of wearing akek rings or Islamic akek rings among Shia Muslims, not all Muslims do it, but Shia do. It goes back to when the Prophet Muhammad retook the Temple of Mecca. So Mecca was the city where Islam was started, right? It's the capital of Islam, right? When Muslims pray, they pray toward Mecca. And there was a big temple in the center of Mecca, and they had idols in the temple, idols, of pagan deities. And when the Muslims took over the Temple of Mecca and converted it to a temple of the one true God, they smashed all the idols. And the Prophet Muhammad wore a piece of one of the idols on his hand as a trophy, a victory, celebrating the victory of Islam over paganism. And so Shia Muslim men wear the akek ring in honor of that. Now, also Shia Muslims tend to have, they tend to believe in the power of gems, the power of stones. So it's beyond just that. But after I went to Iran, I saw all the men were wearing this. And I learned the story behind it and the tradition. I thought it was a neat tradition. And so I asked my Shia Muslim friends, would it be okay if I wore one, even though I'm not Shia? And they said, yeah, it would be fine. There are some Muslims, like Sunni Muslims, that would never be caught dead with one of these because they think it's very sinful. They think wearing one of these would be like believing in witchcraft. And I believe the akek stone, the stone on here, a lot of Shias believe it, that it enhances your creativity, etc. And a lot of like very traditional Sunni Muslims reject anything like that. They think it's all very sinful. You shouldn't have any quote unquote superstitions like that. But Shia Muslims tend to, wear stones. They tend to, burn incense and do little rituals and stuff. So yeah, they said that, if I wore this, it might raise, suspicion that I was a Shia Muslim. I'm not. I'm a Christian, but I think it's a neat thing. And the story of smashing the pagan idols and worshiping the one true God, I find to be a very inspiring story. And I've talked about that in a variety of talks I've given on the topic of Marxism and religion. Especially I talk about Thomas Carlyle. Good friend of mine gave me the book Heroes, Hero Worship, and the Heroic in History. That talks about why all the great prophets smashed idols. Why did all the great prophets go around smashing idols? And he talks about that. And, the Chinese Revolution began with Dr. Sun Yat-sen smashing idols. And I consider myself to be an idol smasher in a lot of ways because, what Thomas Carlyle talks about is that smashing idols is a way to connect with what the idols were meant to stand for. The idols were originally erected to stand for principles. But then after a while, bowing before the idol becomes a routine, and the principles that the idol stood for are forgotten. So smashing the idols is a way to connect with the one true God, is to connect with the principles upon which the idols once stood for. And I view a lot of what I'm doing as doing that, right? Like right now, I'm smashing the idol of communism. Communism is supposed to be about striving for vast material abundance. It is supposed to be about eradicating scarcity. It's supposed to be about defeating imperialism. But the hammer and sickle and the red flag has become an idol. And instead of fighting to abolish scarcity, and instead of fighting to eradicate scarcity, and instead of fighting imperialism, people they've begun worshiping the idol of the hammer and sickle and the red flag and the rebellious zeitgeist, right? And the zeitgeist of libidinal release. And so by smashing the idol of communism, I'm returning people to what communism was originally supposed to stand for, which is vast growth and belief in human creativity and opposing imperialism, right? And so what I just got finished telling you all is an example of smashing an idol. Right? Communism was started out as a movement to defeat imperialism and a movement to unleash the productive forces, but then it turned into an idol. So we have to smash the idol so we can get back to what it originally stood for. Right? And that's why I like the symbolism of the akek ring. I like it because of that story that I learned from Thomas Carlyle and what I see myself as doing. I do seek to connect you to truth. I want to connect you to God. I want to connect you to higher truths. I want to unleash your creative power and the creativity within your soul, right? I want to help you to be the best version of yourself. I want to defeat imperialism and unleash human creativity to new bounds. In order to do that, I have to lift the artificial restraints that include the idols So there we go. What advice do you have for a young person with your political views? I found most people around me do not tolerate my politics, so I have to stay closeted, especially around suburban liberals. I love what CPI is doing. Well, there's a number of ways I could answer this, Gala. The main thing I would argue is that you need other people, right? You need to go and seek out other people with these views. I would encourage somebody with these political views to join the Center for Political Innovation, because there you will find other people who have these views, who are not just trying to create an internet fandom. They're trying to create a real community with the intent of enhancing your skills and advancing you. So that's the first thing that I would say is join a community, meet other people who feel your way. And the other thing is that I would say, be around people. There are places where people are going to be more open to your views. Right? I would argue that, yes, liberals are going to be very hostile, right? But I feel like there are a lot of people in the more conservative thing who are questioning things, who are open to these things. And, people, I remember when I was in high school, I used to always argue with people about politics. And they were older communists I knew, even when I was in high school. And they said, don't make the dividing line. This is one thing, right? Don't make the dividing line. There are divisions within the people around you where some of the people will agree with you and some of the people won't. And if you make the dividing line agreeing with me about everything, you're going to be isolated. But find out what the divisions are in your area. There will be people at your school. Maybe everyone at your school, at your university hates Russia, but I bet there might be some people at your school that think China's doing okay. Well, maybe start having arguments about China where there's people on your side. There might be people at your university, maybe people at your university are very opposed to Russia and China, but maybe there's people at your university that have questions about the trans thing and feel very defensive because there's pro-trans people all around them. So maybe that's the argument you can have. Find a way to draw a dividing line that's not about agree with me and everything that I stand for in my illiberal anti-imperialist views. Find a dividing line. And then if you present yourself as being very solid on one side of a real divide, then people are going to be more likely to bond with you and then listen to you about other things. Find a point of disagreement in the area where there's a lot of people on your side, but a lot of people who aren't, and solidify with the people that are on your side of that dispute, and then they'll be more open to hearing you on the other side. If in your area there's a big debate about, football versus baseball, and you really like football, join the football people. And when there's an argument going on about football versus baseball, argue very loudly for football and become one of the best arguments for football. And all the football fans are going to like you. And then you can talk to them about anti-imperialism, because they'll like you already because you defended them on football so effectively, right? I mean, I'm exaggerating, but find a divide that does exist in your area and solidify yourself on one side of it as a way of getting people to listen to you. I hope that's helpful, Gala. Very good. All right. A super sticker. Thank you, Megan. You do great work. Megan does great work, and I appreciate all that you're doing. So we've got 2 more super chats for me to answer, but the night is young and I've got plenty more to talk about and I got plenty more energy in me. So now I'm going to take the opportunity at this point to talk to you all about this. July 12th, 2025, right? We are going to build a massive anti-imperialist rally in the Chicago area. Now, there's a lot that has to go on between now and then, right? One of the things that has to happen is that we need to relaunch the membership of CPI, and we're going to do that after the elections are over, right? We determined that because of a number of different things that are going on and consulting with attorneys and other things, it's best to keep the Center for Political Innovation informal until after the election. And you will know when CPI membership is formalized and open again, because we are going to have a members drive on this stream. We've already set the date for it, and it'll be after the elections. We will formally open the membership of CPI, and we are going to have a membership drive on this channel. And so you'll know about that soon enough. Right now, everything's on hold. But after the elections, we will reincorporate CPI, and we will then have a membership drive. Right now, being a member of CPI just means that you come to our Zoom calls and that you're on our email list. And we have Zoom calls every Saturday. We just had one today with 17 people on it. And we have a members chat on Signal that if you come to a Saturday Zoom call, you're welcome to join. We do have people meeting, and we are functioning as an organization. We have 151 people that are on our email list right now, and that are participating. And we have, a lot of people who come on our Saturday calls. We have an informal board, which just expanded. One of our members is going to represent us at an international gathering pretty soon, like next week. He's headed to an international gathering. We got a lot going on. As an organization. But the biggest thing on our horizon is coming up next year. Now, and between now and then, a lot needs to happen. Like, we need to reincorporate as an organization. We need to reopen the membership and all of that. But right now, because we don't formally exist as a nonprofit at this point, we're not collecting dues, because you can't collect dues for a group that doesn't exist. That would be fraud. We could go to jail. But one thing we can do right now, and we have decided we are going to do, is that we are going to start collecting money for the conference that happens next year. So because people cannot pay dues to join CPI, one thing they can do is donate and make a recurring donation to the conference fund, because this conference that we're going to do is not going to be cheap. Our fundraising goal for the conference is $30,000 because it's not just one day. I mean, we're flying people in. We're going to have a crew of people in the Chicago area for the week before and the week afterwards. We're planning a really massive thing. We're going to have an event after on July 13th, a very special event that we'll be hearing more about after that. So we're asking that people donate to the conference fund, right? And set up a recurring donation to the conference fund. We just opened it today. And this is a way that, since you can't pay dues to be in CPI, because CPI doesn't formally exist right now, you can donate to the conference fund. So if you would like to help contribute to our efforts, since we don't formally exist, I would encourage you to donate to the conference fund. And that is being handled by Peter Kay, our member. And he is a great member of our group who does great work, and he's handling the conference fund. And that's a way that if you can help CPI and help our activities, is donating to the conference fund. We have a number of things coming up. It looks like we're going to be having an event in New York City on October 17th, themed around peace on the Korean Peninsula. Now, details are soon to be announced. We'll have a poster and everything soon. It's not formally announced yet, but it's, if you're in the New York City area, October 17th is when we are looking to have an event themed around the peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula. So mark your calendar for that. Tomorrow, we're having a Midwest Zoom call, because it looks like in the Chicago area, we're going to have a workshop pretty soon. We just have to, agree on the details about that as well. And so we're going to have a Zoom call tomorrow with our Midwest members about doing a workshop, because we want to, start cultivating relationships with the people that we met at the DNC, etc. Also coming up is Rage Against the War Machine 2, which we are listed as sponsors of. If you go to the Rage Against the War Machine website, we are listed as sponsors of that upcoming rally. And we are sponsors, and we're figuring out what our participation will be as sponsors. We're silver level sponsors. We gave $1,000 to the Rage Against the War Machine Coalition because we thought the rally was happening back in February. It didn't happen in February, but it's happening now, and we already gave them the donation. So we're very proud to be members of the coalition, and we are sponsors of that rally. We have done a lot. I made a list of everything CPI has done so far this year, and it was a long list. I just got to tell you, it was a long, long list. I don't know if folks saw that I posted it, and it's only September. So wait until the end of the year. We will have done an awful lot. We have a couple new CPI books that are in the process of being published. They are reprints of classic books that are very important to what we promote and teach. In the next couple of weeks, 2 new CPI books are going to be published. We also now have the audio book of the Houthi book is now available. If you go to the CPI USA website, click on books, right? It has the books that we've published. And now, if you go to Who Are the Houthis and What Are They Fighting For, we now have the audiobook listed along with it. You can listen to the audiobook. And there are 3 different books, CPI books, that have audiobooks with them now. That's a new development, right? We have an audiobook of Where is America Going? We have an audiobook of the textbook of the We Are City Builders. And now we have an audiobook of Who Are the Houthis and What Are They Fighting For? And that's a great development, right? We are always moving ahead with our developments. And we love what we are doing. And the other thing is that I want you, as a CPI member, I want you to find your own way. I want you to figure out what you can do to advance our group. What will your project be to build CPI? John McCarthy is our member. He's dedicated himself to working around the Uhuru case. That's been his project, and he's done great work with that. And the Uhuru movement has been really grateful for all the work we've done to support them. There are other members of our group who focus on Latin American solidarity. There are members of our group who do all kinds of different things, who help us create outreach materials. Different people take on different roles, but I want everyone to find out what their role can be, what they can do to build the organization, right? That's what we want to do. And in the lead up to our upcoming convention, that's going to be very, very important. And so right now, if you want to join CPI, if you go to cpiusa.org and you click join, there is a link that will take you to an email, and you email that email address and we can bring you in to the meetings and such. We can do that. But it's informal. Membership at this point is informal. Peter Coffin is going to have a really good documentary come out that'll be on the CPI YouTube channel. Can't say too much about it. Very exciting development. Peter Coffin is a very dedicated member of our group. He's on our board of directors. So that's very exciting. There's a lot going on as a group. A lot. A lot is happening. And we want to include you in it. We want to build an anti-imperialist movement. So please send more super chats so that I have more to talk about. I see Daniel has got his super chat, and then Carter has his super chat about Bob Dylan. But why don't I'm going to put on some CPI, videos. Please send more super chats. I'm going to put on a quick video. It's just kind of the CPI, the light video that I call it. Just kind of showing you some of our activities. I might show you some other things, but then I'll keep answering questions. So send some more questions for me to answer, because the night is young and I got plenty I can talk about. Carter asks good questions, right? Get me talking. Send me questions to get me talking. All right. So I see that there's a Rumble rant that's come in, which is from YouTube is Trash on Rumble. He says, have you seen big AI companies begging the federal government to regulate them? What is your analysis of this? Is this just another case of giant companies using regulation to restrict smaller ones? That's a good question. I'll tell you what it is. It is that right now the ethics of AI are very unclear. They're very, very unclear. And because of that, corporations don't know what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. And they know that their competitors are in the exact same situation. And They want regulations to be clear because if not, they're going to have to escalate. Right? AI can do a lot of things, but there are certain laws about, there are certain ethical standards. It's considered unethical. If I went into ChatGPT, if I had AI write a book, that would be unethical, right? And it would be unfair to the consumer who would buy it because they wouldn't be reading a real book. They'd be reading something produced by AI. Wouldn't be fair to writers who actually write books. If I just went to AI and said, all right, write a book on the history of the Russian Revolution, and then I sold it as a regular book, the people who bought it would be ripped off from, and also the writers who actually study these things and the scholars would be unfairly treated, and it would ruin everything. But there's no real law about that. There's no law that says I can't go to AI right now and say, write a book on the Russian Revolution, have the machine churn out something, and then put a nice cover on it and sell it like any other book. Now, if I did that, that would be unethical for a number of reasons. And, why can't you just do that, right? And you can bet if they don't regulate it pretty soon, somebody's going to do that. There's going to be somebody who does that, who starts a book publishing house that just goes to AI and has them write books on all kinds of shit. And that's a problem. That's a problem, right? And there's a lot of areas like that where AI can't do what humans do, but it can produce a product that looks like what humans can do, right? I think using AI to proofread is perfectly ethical. I think using AI to help with the process of creating artwork is fine. I think there's a number of things that it's okay to have AI do, but AI is not a person. And if you present something from AI as if it's from a person and there's no human involvement in it, the person can tell and they got ripped off, right? And it's a matter of they're all competing to make as much money as they possibly can. And there are certain things that they don't want to do, but they also don't want the other guy to do them. And if the other guy does them, then they're going to have to do them too. And so because of that, they want the government to step in and draw clear red lines. And there's many examples of this. I mean, with pollution, right? Because, corporations, in a lot of cases, corporations want there to be environmental laws so that it's clear what they can do and what they can't do, and the same for their competitors, right? You can't expect corporations to self-regulate because of competition. And because of competition, when you can't expect people to self-regulate, they need there to be regulation so that the competition doesn't get out of control. Because at the end of the day, the capitalist market is very competitive. And if lines are not drawn, the lines will be broken. You can't count on people to just act ethically. You just can't count on that in a capitalist market when there's competition. The term externality, right, is used, right? If there's a result of your actions as a capitalist corporation, but it doesn't affect your profit margin, in business terms, that is called an externality, meaning it's external. It has no impact on your decision, right? If what you do in order to maximize your profits results in certain things, but those things don't impact you as a business, they're considered an externality, right? And the only way to make companies take externalities into effect is to make a regulation, right? If polluting, hurts the environment, that doesn't affect your profits at all. Well, that's an externality. But if you make it a regulation where they get fined, etc., then it's no longer an externality. It is a reality the corporation has to take into account, right? And so regulations make externalities no longer external. And I hope that answers your question. Regulations are a way of enabling companies, forcing companies and enabling companies to take into account externalities and the external effects of their actions, which in many cases companies would prefer because, and this is one reality of the capitalist system, is when you have entities that's goal is to maximize profits. Many people have talked about, right? If a corporate CEO started thinking about the good of society as he ran his company, his shareholders could sue him because he's obligated to maximize profits, to get them the biggest return on their investment. And if they can prove that he's taking into account what would be best for society, what would be best for the environment, what would be they could sue him because they say, your job, you are obligated to get me the maximum return on my investment. Profits are in command. And so regulations are a way that corporations can take things into account. And there's many examples of this. But yes, though, to answer your question, YouTube, to be fair, though, the rules that are written will be written by the big guys, and it'll be the little guys that get hurt by them. And that's always how it is. Campaign finance law does not get rid of corruption in politics, just makes it way more expensive, right? Environmental regulations don't stop pollution. They just enable the big corporations to pollute and the little corporations to be more restricted in their activities. That with a capitalist government, the way things are currently set up, the rules and regulations that do get passed will be written by the biggest fish. And that's why the lower levels of capital tend to be more libertarian in their outlook, because of the fact that they know they won't get to write the rules. And that's an ongoing reality, in capitalism. And that's the basis of the Yankee and Cowboy War and all of that stuff that I talk about. Daniel, thank you very much. Love your views, and so many are ready for big changes. So much appreciation from upstate New York. Daniel, I really appreciate that. I really, really do. And, we have an operation that we are carrying out, right? We want to get things done. We want to bring people together. We want to promote anti-imperialism. We want to build an anti-monopoly coalition. We want to defeat imperialism, and we want to build a network of Americans who can take action to love their country and love their community and build a better, stronger America beyond this dying imperialist financial system that is hurting all of us, right? That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get some things done. We're not trying to win the internet, right? We're not trying to win the internet. We're trying to actually get things done and build a network of people who can rely on people, rely on each other, and trust each other. That's what we are trying to do. So on that note, I'm going to answer the next question. Now, Carter says, this is an interesting question. He says, ever look into Bob Dylan? He went from fellow traveler, probably considered himself a Marxist, then became a hardcore Zionist, to left liberal. Odd. Well, Carter, I haven't looked into him in great depth, but I will tell you what I do know, which is that, there was somebody I was in the Workers' World Party with who knew Bob Dylan when she was a teenager, and he was a teenager. And I don't know a huge amount about Bob Dylan. His real name is Robert Zimmerman, and I believe he's from Long Island, New York, but he spent his teen years in Greenwich Village. So in the late 1950s, there was McCarthyism, right? McCarthyism crushed the Communist Party. McCarthyism, the leaders of the Communist Party were thrown in federal prison, etc. As McCarthyism was fading, right, you had the rise of Cold War liberalism. You had TV shows like The Twilight Zone that were like anti-totalitarian. You had, Dwight Eisenhower warning about the power of the military-industrial complex and all that. Late 50s, early 60s, there were a lot of things that showed, that McCarthyism was shifting, and that, the ultra-rich really, they saw McCarthyism as a threat to their power. They thought Khrushchev, the leader of the Soviet Union, was somebody who they could negotiate with, and they were right. And Khrushchev very much was willing to restrain third world anti-colonial movements in order to get détente from the United States. And he did that. He told the South African revolutionaries to lay down their arms, and that Khrushchev was willing to use his position as the head of the Soviet Union to, weaken and hold communist revolutions in exchange for the United States de-escalating the arms race. And so you had like kind of a liberal thaw in McCarthyism. And a lot of things happened in the culture. One of the things that happened in the culture was there was a huge surge of interest in folk music, because folk music had been associated with the Communist Party, right? Woody Guthrie was the most famous folk musician in the United States during the 1930s, and he was a member of the Communist Party. Most likely. He would never say if he was a member of the Communist Party. If they asked him, are you a member of the Communist Party? He would say, well, I never really cared much for parties, but I've been in the red my whole life, which, I mean, stuff like that. He would give clever answers like that. But he had a column in the Daily Worker called Woody Says, Woody S-E-Z says. And he was this guy, this kind of hillbilly guy, but he lived in Greenwich Village in the late 1930s, and he went around doing folk music concerts, and he was associated with the Communist Party, and that fit the Communist Party's strategy. The Communist Party, they were trying to build a popular front, and if you read what was said at the time, the idea was to find aspects of the American spirit that were in line with communist values. And so in folk music, there's a lot of anti-racist messaging in folk music. There's a lot of pro-labor messaging in folk music. There's a lot of, and so Woody Guthrie, he led, kind of an artistic movement that was promoted by the Communist Party. It was they had the Almanac Singers and all of that, where they were basically, because the Communist Party thought that's what needed to be done, they were producing American folk music and amplifying the things about it that were in line with communism, like anti-racism, like, anti-fascism, like being for the working class. So much so that there's an album that they released. So, when the Stalin-Hitler Pact was signed in 1939, there was an album that they released that was an anti-war album, and then they retracted it. I will put on, they released an anti-war song. I'll put it on, The Ballad of John Doe. Right. I can, they released an anti-war song. So when the Stalin-Hitler Pact was signed, when the Stalin-Hitler Pact was signed, let me see if I can find a recording. I can't play the Pete Seeger version of it on here because then they'll take my stream. Was it The Death of John Doe? Right. Right. The Strange Death of, right. Okay. Let me make sure this is not, right. Okay. Let me see if I can put this song on. I do want to put on the anti-war song that they recorded, but I just want to make sure, right, that I don't have an issue. All right. So yeah, so this is the version that was, let me see if I can, My Darling Party Line, right? Because the Trotskyites sang it afterwards to kind of make fun of them. Let me see. Just want to find a version of the anti-war song that they recorded. I want to find a version of it I can get away with playing on here that won't cause me an issue. But let me see if I can find it. All right. But yeah, 1939, they released a whole anti-war album. Here we go. Song for John Doe. All right, I found it. All right, so let me put it on. Right, they released a whole anti-war album because the Soviet Union signed the Stalin-Hitler Pact. And then when World War II started, they changed their minds, and they switched their position, and they became pro-war after Pearl Harbor and after the Soviet Union was invaded. And this is the song. They released a whole anti-war song. I can't put the Pete Seeger version of it on because of copyrights or whatever, but I'll put on a version. Someone recording. This is the anti-war song that Woody Guthrie and all of them sang, that they basically retracted once World War II started. It's called it's called Song for John Doe, as I think what it's called. Yeah, Song for John Doe. I think the name of the album was Songs for John Doe. If I could just, now it's not letting me download for some reason. This is frustrating. Okay, let me see if I can. What a night, folks. But anyway, I'm getting to the point about Bob Dylan. This is a very, Carter, I apologize. This is a very long, roundabout way of making the point that I'm making about Bob Dylan. Anyway, folk music had been associated with the Communist Party. I'm glad you came to the right place. Folk music had been associated with the Communist Party, okay? And because folk music had been associated with the Communist Party, there was a revival of folk music as McCarthyism was fading because, you know, during McCarthyism, Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger had been blacklisted. They'd been banned from the airwaves. The FBI had chased after them and stalked them and all kinds of stuff. And, part of getting rid of McCarthyism was that they were, here we go. That part of getting rid of McCarthyism was that folk music was okay again, and folk music, became popular again in Greenwich Village and other places. And so it was like edgy though, because it had been associated with communists, and that a lot of young people, a lot of young teenagers, especially young teenagers who were Jewish, who lived in New York City, got into folk music because it was associated with communism. It was edgy. It was against McCarthyism, and it was in New York City. And Greenwich Village was kind of the center of a revival of folk music. And you had groups like the Kingston Trio. You had groups like Peter, Paul, and Mary, and a million of these folk music groups became popular in Greenwich Village. And it was very political. It was against McCarthyism, and the ruling class was using the media to promote it, right? Because they saw it as a way to oppose McCarthyism. And actually, like, there's the Chad Mitchell Trio. Have you ever heard of the Chad Mitchell Trio? This is one of the folk music groups that was popular. And they have songs making fun of the Ku Klux Klan, making fun of the John Birch Society. A lot of their songs are explicitly political, and it was because McCarthyism was seen as dangerous. So young Bob Dylan was a young Jewish guy from Long Island who, other young Jewish people were into folk music, and, they would work really, really hard to sound like Woody Guthrie, right? And you have to remember Woody Guthrie, he eventually got a disease that affected his ability to sing. And so Bob Dylan worked really, really hard to sound like Woody Guthrie. And a lot of young people did that because they wanted to. Woody Guthrie was like the ideal of what a folk singer sounded like. He was the folk singer of the 1930s. He was the communist folk singer. So if you were wanting to be a folk singer, you sounded like Woody Guthrie. And so Bob Dylan really worked hard to make his voice sound like Woody Guthrie. Woody Guthrie was like the ideal that all these young folk singers wanted to be. They all wanted to be Woody Guthrie. And folk music was associated with communism. It was associated with Marxism. And it was kind of, this was like a precursor to the whole hippie thing. Hippies were more rock and roll, and that came later, but this was like earlier. There was like the folk music revival of the 1950s. That's what Bob Dylan comes out of. He was a young Jewish guy from Long Island, but, he spent his teen years in Greenwich Village in New York City. The person that I knew him during those years. She didn't know him later when he became famous. And he was like many, many teenagers during those years. He got into folk music because there was this folk music revival going on. Many people have pointed out that as the anti-Vietnam War movement got going, it became almost universal among young people that were in liberal areas, right? Whereas, obviously rural areas, the South, a lot of young people were not into the hippie counterculture thing, but among middle-class young people, among young people in liberal areas, among young people on college campuses, the anti-war movement and the counterculture and the hippie thing became very mainstream, right? It was all on TV and all of that. It was almost universal. And, and it took on very, people talked about how it was very dumb. Like, there'd be bumper stickers that said, "War kills." Well, no shit. That's part of the definition, right? And they'd have bumper stickers, and you'd meet I've heard people tell the stories that you meet a young guy and he'd be like, "Man, I think war kills. Man, I'm like so deep," and it just became so routine to be anti-war. It was almost like being a hippie, being a young hippie anti-war person was almost not really. It was almost not questioned, right? And so for Bob Dylan to have been a young person who was into the folk music scene, which was around the communist movement, to have been interested in communism and to have been in the anti-war movement, that wasn't surprising, right? But then as the Vietnam War things started winding down, other issues arose, and you had the communist movement went in the party building direction, right? With the new communist movement of the 1970s, Jane Fonda was really into, she was part of, she was basically around the Revolutionary Union, the precursor of the Revolutionary Communist Party. She was around the RU. And Jane Fonda was calling herself a Maoist, and she went to Vietnam and met with, the Vietnamese National Liberation Front. And that, there were all these young people that were interested in communism that were part of the anti-war protest movement, but were like more into it than other people and like took it more serious and were becoming ideological. Well, as the anti-Vietnam War movement declined, you had the rise of the party building tendency, which was, that the new communist movement, basically we're going to form vanguard parties. And there was the various Maoist groups, the Revolutionary Communist Party, the October League, but all those groups started trying to not be counterculture because they wanted to get to the masses. And then the popular culture started shifting away from them. There was like a divergence, right? So, yes, people in Hollywood, people in the arts, they tend to be liberal and all of that, but there was a break between them and the ideological Marxists. The ideological Marxists were doing what you're supposed to do and trying to build a real party. And the Hollywood people, the people in the music industry and other things who'd been around them when they were protesting the Vietnam War and had been around them as part of this like cultural shift away from McCarthyism, they were not following them in the full Marxist direction, right? And that like the Revolutionary Communist Party got really into country music during these years because that was more working class, and they realized you had to get to the masses, and the cultural scene shifted. And then, right, a big moment was in the early 80s, Jane Fonda and Tom Hayden. So Jane Fonda and Tom Hayden. Tom Hayden had been a founder of Students for a Democratic Society, right? He was this liberal activist, Tom Hayden, right? He'd been one of the Chicago 7. He was a founder of SDS. He'd been a radical. And Jane Fonda, the actress, they married each other, Jane Fonda and Tom Hayden. And they were both, radical left folks, right? And they got married. But when Israel invaded Lebanon in 1982, they both went around on speaking tours defending Israel and their invasion of Lebanon. Why? Because they were not really hardcore Marxists. They were Hollywood, right? They were Hollywood. They were liberals. And the hardcore Marxists, supported the Palestinians. The Soviet Union supported the Palestinians and all of that. But Jane Fonda and Tom Hayden, they supported Israel because Hollywood supported Israel, right? That they were not Marxists. They were part of this kind of liberal cultural milieu that kind of aligned with Marxists against the Vietnam War, aligned with Marxists in support of civil rights, but they were not down for the whole thing, right? And that they were part of a liberal cultural scene. And that's the same with Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan was part of a liberal cultural movement that aligned with communism in the early 60s and into the late 60s. But by the mid 70s, the people that Bob Dylan was associating with and communism had parted ways. The communists were doing the party building thing and falling apart, right? And just they'd lost all their oomph, basically. And by the early 80s, we talk about the Great Retreat when all those groups were in complete decline. Whereas the cultural figures like Jane Fonda, all of them who'd been associated with communism, they were not associating with communism anymore. They were still doing this liberal cultural thing. And so because of that, Jane Fonda and Tom Hayden were going around supporting Israel. And Bob Dylan was being a hardcore Zionist. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I believe Bob Dylan was an evangelical Christian at one point. He became a born again evangelical, if I'm not mistaken. Didn't Bob Dylan at one point convert to being an evangelical? If I'm not mistaken, he was an evangelical, and then he became an Orthodox Jew after that, if I'm not mistaken. right? In the 70s, he became a born-again Christian, because in the 1970s, there was very much a, there was the rise of the modern religious right. What's very weird is that the modern religious right, this is surprising, but it's not really surprising. See, I noticed this. So Carter, you always get me talking about the good old days. I remember when I was a kid during the Bush administration, during the Bush years, time of 9/11, before 9/11, after 9/11, the religious right, the evangelical Christian right, was very, very popular. And it was almost like a common thing. You would have a dad, right? A guy who'd gone to high school in the 70s, and he would be a dad, and he'd have kids, and he would almost have a midlife crisis. And suddenly he would grow his hair long, and he would grow a beard, and he would start taking, maybe he was Catholic before, or he wasn't religious, didn't think about religion that much. He was from maybe a Catholic family, or, he wasn't that religious at all. It was like he grew up with religion, but he didn't mean it. But part of his midlife crisis, this was really common, is the dad, he's had 2 kids, he's in his 40s, he's realizing he's not young. He suddenly grows his hair long, which was the style when he was in high school. He grows a long beard, which again was the style when he was in high school. And he starts playing the guitar. Again, that's part of the hippie thing, part of the style when he's in high school. And he makes the family convert to being evangelicals, right? That happened a lot. I knew a lot of people when I was a kid that's why their family was evangelical, was the father had kind of a midlife crisis. And part of it was reverting to the aesthetics of being a hippie, which is what he'd been in high school, but it translated to being a born-again evangelical Christian. The megachurch stuff, the megachurches very much have a hippie aesthetic to them. Guys with long hair, playing guitars, being very soft. I just want to love, man. If everyone could just love. The megachurch evangelical Christian right is very heavily influenced by 1960s hippie counterculture aesthetics. There's no way around that, right? Go and listen to contemporary Christian music, Newsboys, all that stuff. It's all very, very influenced by hippieism, right? And what's that about? Well, it's rooted in that, right? So the origins of the modern religious right, this is where it gets very interesting, right? In the 1960s, you have youth culture, young people who watch TV, young people who listen to rock and roll. They're not religious. Religion is not their thing, because that's the man, that's the establishment, right? God and the flag, that's the government, that's the establishment. So young people are growing their hair long, they're doing drugs, they're marching against the Vietnam War, they're marching for civil rights or whatever. There's a small minority of hippies, cultural hippies, who decide that the way to be a hippie is to be religious. And most of them were Catholic, right? Most of them became Catholic because they believed in having one church. And they were called the Jesus freaks. And freak was the term for a hippie. And you had a small subset of hippies. Most hippies were not religious at all. They believed in free love. Some of them were even interested in communism, but for the most part, most hippies were using drugs. They were into rock and roll music. They were not religious, but there's a subset of hippies who became religious. They were called Jesus freaks. And a lot of them were Catholic early on because they believed in one church. And there had been something called the Catholic worker movement, right? And it still exists. It's like a strange, I don't know what you want to call it, Catholic worker movement, right? Have you ever heard of the Catholic worker movement, right? It's started by a woman named Dorothy Day. Dorothy Day had been in the Communist Party, and she started her own group. I don't know what you want to call it, her own sect, her own group that were like communists that joined the Catholic Church. They were called the Catholic Worker Movement. This is their symbol. and they were the Catholic worker movement, but what made them different than the Communist Party is they were pacifists. You had to be, they could not serve in war, and they were pacifists, and they were not really Catholic because they didn't believe in Catholicism. They just joined the Catholic Church because they wanted there to be one church, right? They didn't believe that there should be separate churches. They believed in the unity of Christianity. So they joined the Catholic Church. They really believed in communism, though. They were like communist Christians in the 1930s, led by a woman named Dorothy Day. Dorothy Day was their leader, and they were like the radical left Christian group, right? It was led by this woman, Dorothy Day. They were the radical left interpretation of Christianity in the 1930s. And they were like aligned with the Communist Party, but then they opposed World War II because they were pacifists, and they were just a group, right? In the 1930s, in the 50s and 60s, they were the Catholic worker movement. So most of your Jesus freaks kind of followed the Catholic worker movement into the Catholic Church, not agreeing with Catholic doctrine, but because the Catholic Church was the biggest church, it was the original church, they wanted there to be one church. So they followed Dorothy Day, and they formed, they would join the Catholic Church, but they were doing their hippie counterculture thing. And a lot of them were pro-civil rights. A lot of them were anti-Vietnam War. And a lot of them were kind of leftists, but they were into the Christian aesthetic. So as a result of that, the right wing was in ascendancy. Richard Nixon became president. Richard Nixon had a spiritual advisor, and Richard Nixon's spiritual advisor was Reverend Billy Graham, right? And Reverend Billy Graham is an interesting figure. So Billy Graham is from North Carolina. He's a minister from North Carolina. And Reverend Billy Graham, he led a big religious revival movement in England. And this is very bizarre, but in England after World War II, there was a big religious revival movement in the 1950s because Britain, a lot of people had died during World War II, and a lot of people didn't know what to believe anymore after World War II. And also communism was quite popular in Britain after World War II, and communism was very atheistic during those years. So post-World War II, Reverend Billy Graham from North Carolina had gone to Britain, and he had led a mass Christian revival movement to oppose communism in Britain and to kind of speak to people's religious needs. And Billy Graham in Britain, he was almost kind of a, it was he was almost like a, what do you call it? Like a caricature, because he had a southern accent, and he talked like this. And I believe in Jesus Christ is gonna say. He was like a character. He was like playing a character. He was like a caricature of what English people thought a fanatical American Southern Baptist preacher was like. That was Billy Graham. So Billy Graham, and he had done a lot to weaken the Labour Party in Britain, right? The Labour Party was kind of moving in a secular direction, and the Communist Party, and he opposed communism, which was atheist, right? And he was fighting for God and Jesus, right? So Billy Graham was this very important figure in British politics, right? Yeah, foghorn leghorn. But anyway, so Billy Graham was an important right-wing political figure in the United States because he had led this anti-communist religious revival in Britain and whatever. So Billy Graham was the spiritual advisor of Richard Nixon. Okay. And Richard Nixon, he became president as kind of a blowback against the hippie movement, right? Average Americans who didn't like the hippies, they followed Richard Nixon, and Nixon said he spoke for the silent majority that didn't approve of the hippies, right? And here's Richard Nixon with Reverend Billy Graham, right? And Billy Graham was his spiritual advisor. So Reverend Billy Graham would do broadcasts. He would do TV broadcasts where he would just, give sermons. And Reverend Billy Graham, as Richard Nixon is president, Billy Graham is doing these broadcasts where he's preaching his message, of Christian revivalism. And Reverend Billy Graham started featuring Jesus freaks on his broadcasts because that would get younger people to watch, right? Back then there was, only television. There was no internet or whatever. There were often people only had 3 channels in their household. So if you're flipping through the channels and, you know, you're a young person who's into rock and roll and you've got long hair and you're deciding, am I going to watch Billy Graham or not? If Billy Graham has young people with long hair on his broadcasts, you're more likely to listen. And it got Billy Graham better ratings to have young people on his broadcasts. So Billy Graham started featuring the Jesus, featuring Jesus freaks just as musical performers on his broadcasts. And that was kind of the beginning of something, because it was a way to get, religious young people, to get young people to watch these religious broadcasts because there were Jesus freaks on them. Here, I'm going to show you, this is a clip. This is 1971. Hold on. I'll show you this clip. This is 1971. This is Reverend Billy Graham preaching. This is one of his broadcasts that he did in 1971. I'm going to show you a clip of Reverend Billy Graham preaching. And this is from a sermon he gave called Who is Jesus? This is a rather famous clip of Reverend Billy Graham talking about Christianity. And I believe this broadcast, Who is Jesus, had, Jesus freak music performers on it, right? But this is Billy Graham, 1971. Nixon is president, and he's trying to get young people to watch his religious broadcasts.
On his brow, and his face was bleeding. And they laughed at him, and they spit on him, and they mocked him. And with one snap of his finger, 72,000 angels had already drawn their swords, ready to come to his rescue and wipe this planet out of existence in the universe. And Jesus said, no, to this end was I born. And he dragged and lifted and hauled that cross. And don't you black people ever forget one thing. The man that helped Jesus carry that cross was a black man. And don't ever forget another thing. Jesus belongs to Africa as much as he does to Europe and Asia. He was born in that part of the world that touches Africa and Asia and Europe, and Jesus was not a white man like me, nor was he as black as some of you. We don't know what the color of his skin, but it must have been a dark color like the people of his day, because he was a man like them. Don't ever say it's a white man's religion or a black man's religion. It's a world religion. He belongs to the world.
Yeah, that was Billy. That's the kind of TV broadcast that Billy Graham was doing. And he would feature these young kind of Jesus freak young people on those broadcasts. And that gave way to a number of different things, right? And that there were a number of different groups that were kind of marketing Christianity to young people with counterculture aesthetics. Eventually, you had the rise of Reverend Billy Graham, you had the rise of Jerry Falwell, right? And the Moral Majority. 1978, a very conservative pastor named Jerry Falwell, he launched the Moral Majority. And, you had the beginnings with Pat Robertson and Jerry Falwell. You had the beginnings of what you can call the modern religious right. Here, this is Jerry Falwell. As part of the Reagan Revolution, you got the rise of kind of a new brand of evangelical Christianity that was very heavily influenced by hippie counterculture aesthetics, right? And the mega churches and all that stuff that really peaked during the administration of Bush. I think since the administration of Bush, it's really declined. It doesn't have the power it once had, but it did under Bush. It certainly had a lot of power. You had the rise of Jerry Falwell, Pat Robertson, people like that. This is Reverend Jerry Falwell, 1981.
Pornography is seeping its way into television, and it must be stopped. That's one of the things the Reverend Jerry Falwell said tonight to a room full of broadcasters.
And now, all 3 networks on public airwaves, which belong to the people, not the presidents of the networks, nor the FCC, are beginning to do the same thing by dumping their cesspool into the living rooms of America.
Falwell also defended his opposition to abortion, calling it a form of biological holocaust. He said the climate in this country is ripe for the prohibition of legal abortion.
And I would like to predict that during this decade, the 1980s, there will be a human life amendment or some form of legislation which will put a stop to what the court began in 1973.
Yeah, and that was Jerry Falwell. And you'll notice he's talking about abortion there, right? That was a big flip. Ronald Reagan had been pro-choice, right? Because Republicans were more in favor of abortion than Democrats were. Democrats were urban Catholics, who Catholics have always been against abortion. It's just part of the Catholic teaching. Kennedy had been a Democrat, and the Democrats tended to have a lot of Catholics. At that point, Catholics tended to be Democrats, and they were anti-abortion. Republicans, on the other hand, they felt that poor people had too many children. And this is before Bill Clinton got rid of welfare as we know it. So during these days, if the more children you had, and if you were on welfare, the more money you got. So Republicans were the ones that were saying that they needed more abortions so that poor people had less children, right? That there was a lot of Republicans back in these days were Malthusians. And they argued that the government was rewarding poor people for having children, and they wanted abortion because they wanted there to be less poor people, right? And so the Republicans, especially the Rockefeller family, they were Republicans until like the 80s, right? Governor Rockefeller and all that, they were big funders of Planned Parenthood, and that it was Republicans that were in favor of abortion, and Democrats, who tended to be Catholics, were against it. And Ronald Reagan, under the Reagan administration, there was a flip, and Reagan flipped. There was a big flip. And the religious right, as we know it, the modern religious right was very much, it comes out of this period. And so, and there were a lot of counterculture figures who went in that direction. So the fact that Bob Dylan would go in that direction doesn't surprise me. He was an evangelical Christian for a while. He was an Orthodox Jew. And that overall, Bob Dylan, he kind of followed certain cultural trends, right? It makes sense that he would, during the downfall of McCarthyism, he'd be friendly to communism. And then in the 1970s, he'd become an evangelical. And now he's just kind of a liberal. I mean, that fits exactly, right? That fits exactly the cultural trend. And, it's kind of like Jane Fonda was around Marxists, and then she became for Israel, and now she's just an anti-Trump liberal, right? Jane Fonda, it fits, right? Based on all these trends, right? Jane Fonda didn't follow the Marxists to do the party building thing, and she became just kind of a pro-mainstream Zionist, and then now she's a big anti-Trump liberal. Bob Dylan, he was a Marxist when the Marxists were in Greenwich Village with the folk music thing, and then when the hippie thing went out, he became an evangelical Christian, and now he's just a regular liberal who is, anti-Trump. That fits, I guess, Carter. That's a long roundabout way of answering your question. But anyway, that brings me to, I will put on the Ballad of John Doe. Right? I will put on the song for John Doe. So the Communist Party USA, they were originally they were always very anti-fascist. But when the Stalin-Hitler Pact was signed, they went into kind of an anti-war mode. And anyone can clip anything, by the way. If you want to cut from my streams and post them elsewhere, you're totally welcome to do that. Anyone's welcome to cut anything. And during the Stalin-Hitler Pact, they went into anti-war mode. And then when the Soviet Union was invaded and then Pearl Harbor happened, they became pro-World War II. So they tried to cover up that this song had ever existed. They were very embarrassed that they had recorded this song. This is not Woody Guthrie singing it, because then we'll have an issue. But this is the anti-war song that the communists, that Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger and all of them wrote to oppose World War II, that they then tried to cover up. It's called The Song of John Doe.
It was on a Saturday night and the moon was shining bright. They passed the conscription bill, and the people they did stay for many miles away was the president and his boys on Capitol Hill. Oh, Franklin Roosevelt told the people how he felt. We damn near believe what he said. He said, I hate war, and so does Eleanor, but we won't be safe till everybody's dead. When my poor old mother died, I was sitting by her side, promising to war I'd never go. But now I'm wearing khaki jeans and eating army beans, and I'm told that J.P. Morgan loves me so. I have wandered over this land, a Roman working man, no clothes to wear and not much food to eat. But now the government puts the bill, gives me clothes and feeds me swill, gets me shot and puts me underground 6 feet. Oh, Franklin Roosevelt told the people how he felt. We damn near believed what he said. He said, I hate war, and so does Eleanor, but we won't be safe till everybody's dead. Why, nothing can be wrong if it makes our country strong. We gotta get tough to save democracy. And though it may mean war, we must defend Singapore. This don't hurt you half as much as it hurts me. Oh, Franklin Roosevelt told the people how he felt. We damn near believe what he said. He said, I hate war, and so does Eleanor, but we won't be safe till everybody's dead.
All right. So now I'm answering people's questions. So if people have any more questions, please go ahead. It's funny. I feel like I'm a boomer because people are asking me about Bob Dylan and they're asking me about all kinds of stuff. This next one is a boomer question if there ever was one, and I'm probably way too young to answer it. But the Beatniks, who were the Beatniks? So as I mentioned, at the same time that the folk revival was going on, you had all this new interest in folk music as a counter to McCarthyism. You also had an artistic movement called the Beatniks. And that was Allen Ginsberg, Jack Kerouac, and some others. And it was probably promoted by the CIA. When I talk about reinventing left-wing politics and such, the Beat movement is very much a CIA thing, if there ever was such a thing. I mean, it was, Allen Ginsberg, his parents, his mother had been a member of the Communist Party, I believe. But he was this kind of weird, kind of non-conforming, guy. And in San Francisco, they published a collection of his poems that had homosexual stuff in them. He was gay. Allen Ginsberg was gay. And I believe he was actually a pedophile, if I'm not mistaken. He was in the pedophile group. I'm not going to say their name, but yeah, Carter said it in the chat. And he was this gay pedophile dude. I don't know what to say about him, but he was a poet and he wrote a lot of poems, and he wrote this book of poems called Howl, which had a lot of gay sex references in it and a lot of obscene words. And he was arrested for it. And it got a lot of attention in the media, and he was really into Eastern mysticism. And that's a really common thing. So the Beatniks were pushing the social norms of what was acceptable, a lot of pornographic and homosexual stuff in their art, and also a lot of references to Buddhism or Hinduism or Eastern mysticism. And hallucinogens and drugs, marijuana and hallucinogens and stuff. They were kind of laying the foundations of the counterculture. And there was also this odd, they admitted they were from the tradition of the Communist Party, but they didn't like the Communist Party. They thought the Communist Party was uptight. They thought the Communist Party were squares. In that collection of poems by Allen Ginsberg, Howl, there's a poem called America. And it it has references to the Communist Party USA, and he talks about going to Communist Party meetings with his mother when he was a kid. And so it's like they respect the Communist Party. Like, they don't hate the communists the way they're supposed to as good conforming Cold War Americans, but they think the Communist Party is uptight because it doesn't have gay stuff in it, and it's not promoting drug use, and then they're into the Eastern mystical thing. This is when we talk about the CIA reinventing what it meant to be a leftist, right? What's interesting is all the themes that you find that I'm mentioning here: hallucinogenic drug use, Eastern mysticism, and homosexuality. These are all things you found in Nazi literature. I'm dead serious, and this is something that doesn't fit, but the Nazis were really big in the bohemian scenes of, pre-war Weimar Germany. And the head of the Nazi SS was a gay guy named Ernst Röhm. And they thought Eastern mysticism was great. They thought the caste system in India was great because there was no class struggle. And that Eastern mystical religions were great because they pointed to natural hierarchies and all of this, and that there was this natural way of some people just being superior than others. And, and the use of drugs and having mystical, occult religious experiences by inducing it with drugs, all of that was associated with the Nazis, right? That was fascism, right? Fascism was the middle class occult, the middle class, mystical, backward looking to nature for inspiration, hating humanity. That was all considered the far right. That was all considered the far right. So, I mean, it's weird, but, as the CIA, we know what the Congress for Cultural Freedom was changing art and politics in the United States. They gave rise to what was ostensibly a left-wing aesthetic movement that kind of laid the basis for the hippie counterculture, but it was earlier. This is the late 50s. You had the rise of Allen Ginsberg, the rise of Jack Kerouac and people like that. And their whole thing was they were pushing cultural norms. They were into the Eastern mysticism. They were into homosexual stuff and, drugs and all of that. And they were pushing the boundaries, and they were like a poetic movement. So there you go. There you go. I will say this about the whole pedophile thing. It wasn't really until the 80s that the gay rights movement started like very thoroughly disassociating with pedophiles. They did, though. In the 80s, there was a very clear line, in the 80s, the 1980s, the gay rights movement was like, we will not have anything to do with pedophiles. But until then, there was, among gay men in particular, there was a tolerance for pedophiles because many gay men were molested, and that they thought they were the only gay person in the world until they got molested. It's very sad, but a lot of gay men back then, no one knew what homosexuality was. It wasn't discussed. And so a lot of gay men had the experience of being molested by a coach or a teacher or a priest or something like that. And that was when they realized they weren't the only gay person in the world. And so there was an odd feeling that was somehow a good thing or something. And it's very sad. It's a very tragic thing. And I've talked about this on streams. People have taken it out of context and tried to smear me before. And that's just dishonesty. I have always made clear what my position is. I am obviously very, very opposed to pedophilia. And I recognize that the overwhelming majority of gay people are not pedophiles. I'm not equating those two things, but people have tried to distort when I talk about this. But it is a fact that until the 80s, there was a section of the gay movement that allowed pedophiles to come around because of this unfortunate, tragic history. And it's just a very sad thing. And I don't know what to say about it, but it's over. I mean, that's the 1980s. It ended. It was done. By the 80s, it was very clear the gay movement wanted nothing to do with pedophiles. But unfortunately, yes, in the 80s, until the 80s, there was a lot of gay men in particular had feelings that even if they weren't themselves pedophiles, they had a feeling that, that their first homosexual experience had been with a pedophile, with a molester. And they felt that was like, that's what helped them realize they weren't the only gay person in the world. It had been a liberating experience or something. It's very sad. It's a very, very sad experience. It is what it is. But anyhow, all right. Bob Dylan said he sold his soul on 60 Minutes. I'm going to Google that. So I want to know the context of that. Bob Dylan says he sold his soul. What is the context of that? If Bob Dylan really did sell his soul to the devil, Bob Dylan admits he made a pact with the devil in order to. Bob Dylan admits he's selling his soul, as Ed jokes about. Sounds like it was a joke. Bob Dylan's alleged deal with the devil, fact or fiction. Okay. Yeah, I don't know much about this. Bob Dylan, the demonic truth about his rise to fame. That's a bizarre thing. That's just downright bizarre. Did Bob Dylan sell his soul to the devil? Jesus. That's scary. Was asked a rather hollow question of why he continued to play shows despite his massive riches and fame. He said he made a deal to get where I am now and that he's grateful. That he's a grateful man. And Dylan's response was surreal. He says, it goes back to the destiny thing. I made a bargain with it a long time ago and I'm holding up my end. It was then promptly asked who made the deal, to which Dylan gave a wry smile and laughed and said, with the commander in chief of this earth and the world we can't see. That's creepy. Shit. I mean, I've never heard that one before. This is interesting. He said he spoke of chief commander, not Satan. That whole thing is weird as hell. That's bizarre. I don't even know what to make of that. That is a weird one. That is a weird one. That is very strange. I don't even know what to say, Mariah. That is a weird one. I had never heard that before, and I don't even know what to make of it. He says it was a joke or it was a Robert Johnson reference. That whole thing is just really strange. All right. How can materialistic art and science be the movement for the masses for the development of humanity? Your thoughts. Some say something about rap songs. Well, a lot of people are disappointed by the communist writing on art because if you will get a collection of essays, or there'll be a book on literature and art, or there'll be a collection of quotes from Lenin, and really a lot of the Marxist essays on the artistic question just amount to saying, we really ought to have art that promotes Marxism, and that's not really satisfying. A lot of people who go looking, they want Marxist analysis of art and literature, and they find, less essays by Lenin saying, yeah, that's really important. And they're disappointed by that. I argue that, that the Marxist aesthetic, right? The Soviet aesthetic was very modernist. It emphasized industry, and it also emphasized human strength, and that social realism and socialist realism are the expression of the Marxist tendency on the ultimate of the Marxist expression of art. I think if you watch the films of Sergei Eisenstein, etc., you will find that. One thing I will say is that Trotsky, his writing on literature and art, he's actually very critical. His conception of what literature and art should be is very different than what Stalin thought. I would go watch, the film Ivan the Terrible. A very well-made Soviet film that tells the story of a great Russian czar. I would go watch that. That's a Marxist film, but it's about glorifying Russia and the history of Russian civilization. I don't know. Watch Battleship Potemkin. The Soviet aesthetic that gets so widely mocked and that Trotsky criticizes of the big brawny worker, the big strong worker, right? I think there's something to it. I talked about how the Moscow subways are beautifully decorated with ordinary people as the heroes. So there you go. Caleb, the story about selling his deal with the devil originates in blues legends such as Robert Johnson selling his soul at the crossroads. Oh, wow. Okay. See, I don't know my history of blues. I really don't. I don't know my history of jazz and blues and all of that. I really, really don't know that history. I really don't. And, you'll have to forgive me. I really just don't know this stuff. So this was a reference to earlier legends in the music world, right? That's what you're saying, David. It was a reference to earlier legends. Very good. Very, very good. All right, folks. Well, listen, it is almost midnight, and I have been going for well over 3 hours. So, yeah, I appreciate it. I appreciate you all being here. And I am really, really excited about the Center for Political Innovation and what we're doing. I sat down today and I wrote out a timeline of what we need to accomplish in the next couple weeks, in the next couple months. I've got a really exciting plan for January. A way that we're going to promote the upcoming convention in January. And I'm just really excited. Trump is going to win. Trump is going to win, and he's going to knock the socks off Kamala Harris. And there's going to be peace in Ukraine. And we are going to build our mass anti-imperialist movement. I'm very, very excited. So dare to struggle, dare to win, everybody. I'm going to put on the closing music, and we'll be back. Be sure to tune in to the morning messages every morning. Submit a morning message. We always need more morning messages. Let's do it. New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.